Hey everyone! Tonight we're traveling to the windswept Orkney Islands off the northern coast of Scotland, where the North Sea crashes against ancient cliffs and the line between land and water blurs in the salt spray. This is the story of the Nuckelavee, the most horrifying creature in Scottish folklore, and possibly one of the most disgusting monsters ever conceived by the human imagination. Before we begin, go ahead and like this video and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? And if you're from Scotland, particularly the Orkney or Shetland Islands, have you heard stories about the Nuckelavee? Did your grandparents warn you about staying away from the shore during certain times? Have you seen something moving in the sea mist that shouldn't have been there? I'd love to hear your stories. Now settle in, maybe turn on some ambient ocean sounds, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Think the colossal titan's appearance from Attack on Titan was terrifying? Picture something worse. A creature so grotesque that medieval Scots considered it the ultimate evil. A demon so foul that even other monsters supposedly feared it. The Nuckelavee isn't your typical ghost story. There's no tragic backstory, no sympathetic origin, no misunderstood monster seeking redemption. The Nuckelavee is pure, concentrated malevolence, wearing the decayed fusion of a horse and a man like a nightmare made flesh. Or more accurately made of exposed muscle, pulsing veins, and black toxic blood, because the Nuckelavee has no skin whatsoever. And people in the Orkney Islands didn't just tell stories about this creature to scare children. They genuinely believed in it, feared it, organized their lives around avoiding it. Because the Nuckelavee wasn't just a physical threat, it was pestilence incarnate. Crop failure, livestock death, human disease, environmental catastrophe. When the Nuckelavee came ashore, everything died, and there was almost nothing you could do to stop it. Almost. So where does the Nuckelavee come from? Let's start with the name itself, because it's as strange as the creature. The word Nuckelavee is likely derived from Old Norse, reflecting the heavy Viking influence on the Orkney Islands. The islands were under Norwegian control from the 9th to the 15th centuries, and Norse mythology seeped deep into local culture. Some scholars trace it to Nok or Nykra, Scandinavian water spirits known for drowning people. Others connect it to Naken, a shape-shifting creature from Norwegian folklore that lured travelers to watery deaths. But the Nuckelavee evolved into something uniquely Orcadian. It's not quite the same as any Norwegian water spirit. It's more specific, more terrible, more detailed in its horror. The Orkney Islands themselves are crucial to understanding the Nuckelavee. These aren't lush, green landscapes. They're windswept, treeless, harsh. The weather changes in minutes. Storms appear from nowhere. The sea is cold, brutal, and ever-present. Life here was never easy. Farming was difficult. Fishing was dangerous. Disease could wipe out entire communities. Crop failures meant starvation. And in that environment, people needed explanations for catastrophe. Why did the barley rot in the fields? Nuckelavee. Why did the cattle sicken and die? Nuckelavee. Why did the fishing nets come up empty? Nuckelavee. Why did children develop strange fevers? Nuckelavee. The creature became the embodiment of every environmental disaster, every unexplained tragedy, every moment when nature turned hostile. And nature in Orkney turns hostile often. The earliest written accounts of the Nuckelavee date to the 19th century, when folklorists like Walter Traill Denison collected oral traditions from elderly Orcadians. But the stories themselves are much older, passed down through generations, refined and embellished over centuries. What makes the Nuckelavee different from other Scottish monsters like Kelpies or Selkies is its unambiguous evil. Kelpies could be tricked. Selkies could fall in love. Even the Each-Wischt, another water horse demon, had some mystique. The Nuckelavee? Pure malevolence. No negotiations. No deals. No redemption arcs. It existed to cause suffering, and it was terrifyingly good at its job. Now let's talk about what the Nuckelavee actually looks like, because this is where the legend gets genuinely nightmarish. Imagine a horse. Now imagine a humanoid torso growing out of where the horse's neck should be, fused into the horse's back. Not riding the horse, not sitting on the horse, merged with it. One creature with two distinct parts that should never have been combined. Now remove all the skin, every bit of it. What you're left with is exposed muscle, bright red, glistening, pulsing, veins visible and throbbing, tendons stretching and contracting with every movement, blood vessels like black worms beneath translucent tissue, and not regular blood either. The Nuckelavee's blood is described as black or dark yellow, oozing rather than flowing, thick and wrong. The horse portion is massive. Some accounts say it's bigger than any natural horse, with legs like tree trunks and hooves that shake the ground. Its head is enormous. A horse's skull with one gigantic eye. Not two eyes, one. A single eyeball the size of a dinner plate, blood red or burning yellow, positioned in the center of the horse's head like a cyclops. That eye doesn't blink, can't blink, no eyelids. It just stares, unblinking, seeing everything. The humanoid torso growing from the horse's back is equally grotesque. Long arms, far too long for a normal human, reaching down almost to the ground. The hands are enormous, fingers like gnarled branches, each digit capable of wrapping around a grown man's torso. The head, if you can call it that, sits on a neck that's too thin, wobbling slightly with movement. No nose, just two gaping holes in the center of the face. The mouth is wide, stretching from ear to ear, filled with teeth that are too sharp and too numerous. Some accounts say the breath that comes from that mouth is visible, yellow-green vapor that reeks of decay and ocean rot. And all of it is skinless. You see the muscles working. You see the tendons pulling. You see the black blood pulsing through exposed veins. Every movement reveals the inner workings of this abomination. It's not just scary. It's viscerally revolting. Your brain rejects it. This thing shouldn't exist. It violates every rule of biology, every expectation of how bodies should look. And yet, there it is, moving, breathing, existing in defiance of sanity. Must be nice. Thinking evolution made sense. The Nuckelavee would like a word, but the appearance isn't even the worst part. What makes the Nuckelavee truly terrifying is what it does. The creature lives in the sea. That's its natural habitat, the cold, dark waters around the Orkney Islands. During most of the year, it stays there, lurking in the depths. But during winter and early spring, when the sea mither, the protective goddess of the sea, is weakest, the Nuckelavee comes ashore. And when it does, everything dies. Its breath is toxic. Not metaphorically toxic, actually poisonous. The yellow-green vapor that pours from its noseless face carries disease. Crops wilt when it passes. Grass turns brown. Trees lose their leaves. Animals that breathe the air sicken and die. Humans who encounter the Nuckelavee's breath develop what Orcadians called morta sheen, a wasting sickness that causes fever, weakness, and eventual death. The symptoms sound like tuberculosis or other respiratory diseases, but in folklore, it was the Nuckelavee's doing. The creature's mere presence blights the land. Where it walks, the earth becomes barren. Streams dry up or turn foul. Fish wash up dead on the shore. The air itself feels heavier, harder to breathe, as if the Nuckelavee's existence poisons reality. But it gets worse. The Nuckelavee actively hunts humans. Not for food, it doesn't eat. It hunts for the sake of causing suffering. It chases lone travelers, pursuing them across the moors with terrifying speed despite its massive size. The sound of its hooves is described as thunder, shaking the ground, announcing its approach like a death knell. If it catches you, those long arms reach down and grab you. The hands are strong enough to crush bones. Some accounts say tears its victims apart. Others say it simply crushes them and leaves the bodies broken on the rocks for the tide to claim. And you can't fight it. Weapons don't work. The Nuckelavee is a supernatural entity, not a physical animal. Swords pass through it. Arrows bounce off. Even fire, normally effective against many supernatural creatures, does nothing. You can only run, and hope you're fast enough, and pray you're near running water, because running water is the Nuckelavee's only weakness. Fresh water, specifically. Rivers, streams, even heavy rain. The creature cannot cross running water. It stops at the edge, enraged but unable to follow. Why? No one knows. The legends don't explain it. It's just a fact. Running water protects you. It's the one hard rule in an otherwise hopeless situation. So if you're being chased by the Nuckelavee, you run for the nearest stream. You cross it. You don't stop to look back. You don't slow down to catch your breath. You cross that water, and you keep going until you're far, far away. And even then, you're not safe. Because the Nuckelavee is patient. It remembers. And it will wait for you to make a mistake, to wander too close to the shore, to stray too far from fresh water. Congratulations. Your survival now depends on remembering your local geography while being chased by a skinless horse demon. Must be nice, having time to think clearly during mortal terror. Let's talk about the seasonal aspect of the Nuckelavee, because this is where the legend connects to deeper mythology. The Orkney Islanders believed in the sea mither, mither being the Scots word for mother. She was the protective goddess of the sea, a benevolent force who kept the waters calm and the fish plentiful. During summer, the sea mither was at her strongest. The seas were navigable. Fishing was good. Life was easier. But as autumn turned to winter, the sea mither grew weak. She battled Terran, the spirit of winter storms. Their conflict created the violent weather patterns that made winter seas so dangerous. And when the sea mither was weakest, during the darkest months of the year, the Nuckelavee was freed. Some versions say the sea mither literally held the Nuckelavee captive beneath the waves during summer, binding it with supernatural chains. When winter came and her power waned, the chains weakened. The Nuckelavee broke free. This seasonal pattern meant that people knew when to be most afraid. Winter was Nuckelavee season. The creature was most active from late autumn through early spring. During these months, people avoided the shore at night. They didn't travel alone. They carried protective charms and recited prayers. Midsummer's Eve, the summer solstice, was considered the safest night of the year. The sea mither was at her absolute strongest. The Nuckelavee was fully bound. People could walk the beaches, even at night, without fear. But come November, the shore became enemy territory. This seasonal mythology served a practical purpose. It reinforced caution during the genuinely dangerous winter months when storms made coastal areas deadly. It gave people a framework for understanding seasonal cycles, why summer was safe and winter wasn't. But it also created a persistent, calendar-marked dread. You couldn't forget about the Nuckelavee for long. As autumn approached, the fear returned. As winter darkness set in, everyone knew the demon was loose again. Now let's talk about the Nuckelavee's origins in older mythology, because like many folkloric creatures, it didn't appear from nowhere. The Nuckelavee shares DNA with several other mythological entities. The Kelpie, for instance, another Scottish water horse that lured people to their deaths. But the Kelpie was a shapeshifter. It appeared as a beautiful horse to trick people into mounting it, then dragged them into water to drown. The Nuckelavee doesn't bother with trickery. It doesn't need to. It's too powerful for subtlety. There's also the Each-Wist, the Highland water horse that was even more dangerous than the Kelpie. The Each-Wist lived in both fresh and salt water, making it harder to avoid. It would allow people to ride it, then gallop into the water and tear them apart. But again, the Each-Wist had to lure victims. The Nuckelavee just chases you down. Some scholars connect the Nuckelavee to older pre-Christian deities. The Orkney Islands have archaeological evidence of human habitation going back thousands of years. Neolithic people built stone circles, burial mounds, and settlements. They had their own gods, their own cosmology. When Christianity arrived, many of these old gods were demonized, transformed from deities into devils. Protective spirits became demons. Sacred animals became monsters. It's possible the Nuckelavee descends from an ancient Orcadian sea god, a deity that was once worshipped, propitiated, given offerings. But over centuries of Christian influence, it transformed into pure evil. The offerings stopped. The worship ended. The god became a demon. There's also a fascinating theory that the Nuckelavee might be inspired by real environmental observations, specifically toxic algae blooms. The North Sea around Orkney occasionally experiences algal blooms, massive growths of algae that poison the water, kill fish, and produce foul-smelling gases. These blooms can cause respiratory problems in humans and animals. They make the water look strange, sometimes reddish or greenish. They're environmental disasters. Now imagine you're a medieval Orcadian. You don't know about algae or toxins or environmental science, but you see the water turn wrong. You smell the foul air. You watch your crops wilt and your animals sicken. You see dead fish washing ashore. You need an explanation, and the explanation you already have is the Nuckelavee, the creature whose breath poisons, whose presence blights the land, whose toxic existence explains perfectly what you're witnessing. Whether the Nuckelavee was invented to explain algal blooms, or whether algal blooms reinforced belief in the Nuckelavee, the result is the same, a legend so deeply rooted in environmental observation that it feels real. Let's talk about famous encounters. Unlike some folklore creatures that remain abstract, the Nuckelavee has specific stories attached to it. Tales of people who saw it, who were chased by it, who barely survived. The most famous account comes from a man named Thomas. This story was recorded by folklorist Walter Trail Dennison in the late 1800s, based on testimony from elderly Orcadians who claimed it happened to their grandfather or great-uncle. The usual folkloric distance, close enough to feel real, far enough to be unverifiable. Tamas was traveling home late at night. He was a grown man, strong, not easily frightened. But he'd stayed too late at a neighbor's house, and now he was walking along a coastal path in the dark. The moon was out, providing just enough light to see the road ahead. He heard it before he saw it. A sound like thunder, rhythmic and growing louder. Hoof beats. Massive hoof beats. Too large to be any normal horse. He turned and saw it. The Nuckelavee, emerging from the sea mist. Even in moonlight, its skinless form was visible. Glistening red muscles, black veins, that single enormous eye fixed directly on him. Tamas ran. He wasn't ashamed of it. He ran like his life depended on it, because it did. The Nuckelavee chased him. The ground shook with each step. He could hear its rattling breath behind him, feel the warmth of its toxic exhalations on his back. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he kept running. He knew the land. He knew there was a stream ahead. Not large, barely 3 feet wide, but it was fresh water, and it was running. That was his only chance. He reached it and leaped. His foot caught on the far bank, and he stumbled, falling hard onto the muddy ground. Behind him, the Nuckelavee stopped at the water's edge. He heard it. A sound like tearing metal mixed with an animal's scream. Rage, pure, impotent rage. Tamas didn't look back. He crawled away from the stream, and got to his feet and kept moving. He reached home just before dawn. His family said he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hair, which had been dark, had gone partially gray. He never walked that path again, never stayed out after dark, and for the rest of his life Whenever someone mentioned the coast, his hands would shake. Another story, less famous but equally chilling, comes from a woman named Elspeth. This one involves the Nuckelavee's toxic breath specifically. Elspeth lived in a small croft near the shore. She was a widow, living alone with her young son. One winter morning, she woke to find her chickens dead in their coop. All of them. No visible wounds, no signs of a predator. Just dead. The next night, her cow sickened. It refused to eat, stood in the barn swaying, eyes rolling. By morning, it was dead too. Elspeth knew something was wrong. A pattern was too specific. She asked neighbors if they'd experienced similar losses. They had. All along the coast, animals were dying. Crops that should have been dormant under snow were turning black and withered. The elder of the village, an old man who remembered the old stories, told everyone to stay indoors after sunset, to keep windows shuttered, to burn protective herbs. The Nuckelavee is ashore, he said, and no one laughed. No one questioned him. Elspeth followed the instructions. She stayed inside. But one night, her son, curious, brave in the way children are, opened the shutter to look outside. He saw it, standing at the edge of their property, barely visible in the darkness. The massive horse creature, its skinless form somehow darker than the night around it. That single eye, glowing faintly yellow. The boy screamed, slammed the shutter closed, but it was too late. He'd breathed the air that had passed over the creature. By morning, he was feverish. Elspeth tried everything. Herbs, prayers, old remedies passed down from her grandmother. Nothing worked. The fever raged for 3 days. On the 4th day, it broke. The boy survived. But he was never quite right afterward. He had trouble breathing, caught colds easily, died young, in his 20s, of a lung ailment that the local doctor couldn't explain. Elspeth blamed the Nuckelavee. She died believing that one glimpse, one breath of contaminated air, had stolen years from her son's life. Whether it was tuberculosis, pneumonia, or some other disease doesn't matter. To her, to the community, the explanation was clear. The Nuckelavee had marked her son. These stories served a purpose beyond entertainment. They were survival guides disguised as folklore. Don't travel the coast at night during winter. Don't approach strange animals near the shore. If you see something wrong, get inside. Stay near fresh water. Trust your instincts. All of this is good advice for living on harsh, dangerous islands where weather can kill, where the sea is treacherous, where isolation means help is hours or days away. The Nuckelavee legend kept people alive by scaring them into caution. And maybe, just maybe, by giving them something to blame when tragedy struck anyway. When the unexplainable happened, when good people died for no reason, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't God punishing you. It was the Nuckelavee, the demon, the evil force that even prayers couldn't fully protect against. That was almost more comforting than the alternative, that sometimes bad things just happen. Let's talk about the visual details more specifically, because the horror of the Nuckelavee is in the specifics. The exposed muscles aren't just red. They're described as having different colors in different areas. Dark red in some places, almost purple. Bright red where the muscles are stretched. Pale pink in areas where the tissue is thinner. It's not uniform. It's organic, varied, realistic in the worst possible way. The black veins that run across the surface pulse, visibly. You can see the rhythm of the creature's heartbeat, if it has a heart, moving through its body. The veins bulge and recede, like watching someone's pulse through their neck, but magnified across an entire body. The head wobbles because there's no skin to stabilize it. The muscles and tendons do their best, but without the structural support of skin, the humanoid head lolls slightly with each movement. It's not floppy, the creature has control, but there's an unnatural looseness to it, like watching a puppet whose strings aren't quite tight enough. That single eye on the horse's head is positioned where a normal horse's eyes would be, but merged into one giant orb. It doesn't track movement smoothly. It's too large, too heavy. When the Nuckelavee looks at something, the whole head turns slightly to compensate for the eye's weight and size. And it never blinks. Can't blink. The eye is exposed to salt air, wind, rain. It should dry out. It should be damaged. But it's not. It just stares, wet and glistening, forever watching. The arms of the humanoid portion hang down when not in use, knuckles nearly dragging on the ground. The fingers are too long, the joints in slightly wrong places. When the Nuckelavee reaches for something, the fingers spread wide, each one curling independently like the legs of a massive spider. The mouth doesn't close properly. There's no lips. How could there be without skin? So the teeth are always visible. They're yellow-gray, uneven, and there are too many of them. The jaw can unhinge, opening impossibly wide, revealing a throat that seems to go down forever. And the smell. This is mentioned in almost every account. The Nuckelavee doesn't just look horrifying, it smells wrong. Rotting seaweed, decayed fish, sulfur, ammonia, and underneath all of that, something sweet and cloying like overripe fruit left in the sun. It's the smell of death, not fresh death, old death. Death that's been sitting in water for weeks. Death that the sea tried to swallow, but couldn't fully digest. Your brain has an instinctive reaction to that smell. It triggers nausea, fear, the immediate urge to leave. That smell means danger. It means disease. It means something has gone very, very wrong. Congratulations, your nightmares now have 4D sensory details. Must be nice. Thinking visual horror was bad enough. Now let's talk about the creature's behavior patterns, because the Nuckelavee follows certain rules, even in its malevolence. It emerges from the sea. Always. Every account begins with the creature coming ashore from the water, often during fog or mist when visibility is low. It doesn't suddenly appear inland. It has to travel from its marine habitat to wherever it's going. This means you can predict, to some extent, where encounters are most likely. Coastal paths, beaches, areas near tidal zones. The Nuckelavee ranges inland, sometimes quite far, but it starts at the shore. It's most active at night. Dawn and dusk are also dangerous, but full daylight seems to limit it. There are no accounts of midday Nuckelavee encounters. Whether sunlight weakens it, or whether it simply prefers darkness, the pattern is consistent. It targets lone individuals. Groups are occasionally threatened, but the creature seems to prefer isolated victims. Someone walking alone at night, a shepherd checking on distant sheep, a person who stayed too late at a neighbor's house and now has to travel home in the dark. This might be practical, easier to catch one person than several, or it might be psychological. Isolation amplifies fear. When you're alone, there's no one to help you, no one to witness, no one to confirm you're not imagining things. The Nuckelavee pursues relentlessly once it's targeted someone. It doesn't give up easily. It will chase you for miles if necessary. Only fresh running water or dawn's approach will end the pursuit. And it remembers. This is one of the more disturbing aspects. People who survived an encounter would sometimes report seeing the Nuckelavee again months or even years later, as if it recognized them, as if it was still angry about their escape. Some accounts describe it waiting, positioned near a specific farmhouse night after night, watching, biding its time, until the resident made a mistake, ventured outside, strayed too far from safety. That kind of intelligence is more frightening than mindless aggression. It suggests the Nuckelavee isn't just a force of nature. It's something that thinks, something that plans, something that holds grudges. The creature's relationship with the sea myther deserves more exploration because it's central to the mythology. The sea myther is described as a giantess, though accounts vary on her exact appearance. Some say she's beautiful, with long flowing hair that becomes ocean foam. Others describe her as more abstract a presence rather than a physical form, the personification of summer seas and maternal protection. She's called the mother because she nurtures. She calms storms. She guides fish to fishermen's nets. She watches over sailors and warns of danger. In summer, when she's strongest, the Orkney waters are as safe as they ever get. The Nuckelavee is her opposite. Where she creates, it destroys. Where she nurtures, it poisons. They're locked in an eternal cycle of conflict. Some versions describe an actual battle. At the autumn equinox, the sea mither and the Nuckelavee fight. The storm that marks the transition from summer to winter is their conflict made manifest. Thunder is their voices. Lightning is the sea mither's weapon. The violent seas are the threshing of their combat. The sea mither always loses this battle, temporarily. She's weakened by the changing seasons, while the Nuckelavee is strengthened. She retreats to the depths to recover. The Nuckelavee, freed from her chains, comes ashore. But at the spring equinox, they fight again. This time, the sea mither is recovering, growing stronger. The Nuckelavee is weakening, its winter power waning. She defeats it, binds it once more, and drags it back beneath the waves. The cycle repeats, forever. Neither one can permanently win. This mythology mirrors the actual seasonal patterns of Orkney weather. The violent autumn storms that mark the onset of winter, the calming of seas in late spring, the cycle of safe and dangerous seasons. But it also creates a mythology of balance. The Nuckelavee exists to test humanity. The sea mither exists to protect humanity. Neither one can be eliminated. Light and dark, creation and destruction, safety and danger. You survive by knowing when each is ascendant, by respecting the seasons, by not testing the boundaries. So how did the Orcadians protect themselves? What defenses existed against an unstoppable demon that poisoned the very air? The answer is not many, and the ones that existed were more about avoidance than confrontation. Fresh water was the primary defense. We've mentioned this, but let's get specific. It wasn't just any water. Seawater didn't count. The Nuckelavee lived in the sea. Obviously, it could cross salt water. Stagnant pools didn't work either. It had to be moving fresh water, a stream, a river, a burn, as the Scots call small streams. The water didn't need to be large. A trickle barely 6 inches wide could stop the Nuckelavee dead, but it had to be flowing. Even in drought, as long as there was movement, the barrier held. Why? No one knew. No one questioned it. It was simply fact, verified by every survivor's story. The Nuckelavee could not cross running fresh water. This meant knowing your landscape intimately. Orcadian children were taught to memorize every stream, every burn, every place where fresh water crossed the paths they traveled. If you were out after dark, which you shouldn't be, but if you were, you needed to know where safety was. Farmers would sometimes dig small channels to divert stream water closer to their homes. Not for irrigation, for protection. A symbolic moat that the Nuckelavee couldn't cross. Some families kept buckets of fresh water by their doors. Not drinking water, that was too precious to waste, but water from a stream, blessed by whoever passed for spiritual authority in the area. If you heard the Nuckelavee outside, you were supposed to throw the water across your threshold. Did it work? Hard to say. No one who tried it and failed lived to report back. But it was better than doing nothing. Prayer was the second line of defense. Christian prayers, specifically. The Nuckelavee was considered demonic, which meant Christian symbols and invocations had power against it. People recited the Lord's Prayer, made the sign of the cross, carried small wooden crosses, often carved from driftwood and blessed by the local minister. Some wore them around their necks. Others kept them over doorways. The problem was that prayer required faith. And when you're face to face with a skinless horse demon whose very breath poisons, faith becomes difficult. Terror has a way of emptying your mind of words. You forget the prayers. You forget how to think. Still, survivors often credited prayer with their escape. I prayed to God and ran, they'd say. Whether the prayer helped or whether running was enough is unclear. But psychologically, having something to do, even just reciting words, probably helped people move instead of freezing in fear. Iron was sometimes mentioned as a deterrent, not as effective as with some other supernatural creatures, but worth trying. A horseshoe hung over the door, an iron nail driven into the threshold. The logic was that iron represented human craft, civilization, the opposite of the Nuckelavee's chaotic natural evil. Whether it actually worked or just made people feel safer is debatable. But feeling safer meant people were more likely to stay calm, make good decisions, and survive. So maybe it worked through psychology rather than magic. Fire was useless. You'd think a creature without skin would be vulnerable to burns, but no. The Nuckelavee apparently could wade through flames. Perhaps because it was already associated with death and decay, traditional purifying elements like fire had no effect. Weapons were equally useless. Knives, spears, even the rare firearms that made their way to Orkney in later centuries. Nothing physical could harm it. The Nuckelavee wasn't flesh and blood in the normal sense. It was something else. Something that occupied physical space, but wasn't bound by physical rules. So your options boiled down to run for water, pray, and hope. Not exactly a robust defense system. But then again, the Nuckelavee wasn't supposed to be defeatable. It was apocalypse. It was pestilence. It was the wrath of nature, given form. You weren't meant to beat it. You were meant to survive it. And survival meant respect, caution, knowing your place in a world where you were very small and very vulnerable. The cultural impact of the Nuckelavee on Orcadian life cannot be overstated. This wasn't just a scary story told around the fire. It was an organizing principle of how people lived. Travel patterns changed based on the Nuckelavee. Coastal paths that were perfectly functional were avoided during winter months. People took longer routes inland, even if it meant hours of extra walking, because those routes crossed multiple streams. Safety over convenience. Fishing schedules adapted. Fishermen would time their returns to reach shore well before sunset. If weather or circumstance delayed them, they'd sometimes choose to stay overnight on a neighboring island rather than risk the journey home in darkness. Agricultural practices reflected the legend too. Farmers were careful about where they grazed animals near the coast. Certain areas, even if they had good grass, were left empty during winter. Too close to the Nuckelavee's range, they'd say. Social gatherings respected the danger. Winter celebrations, weddings, wakes, festivals would either happen early in the day so people could get home before dark, or people would stay overnight rather than risk the journey. This created a culture of hospitality. You invited people to stay. You didn't send them into the night. Children grew up with the Nuckelavee as a constant presence in their education, not in the gentle monsters aren't real modern way. In the this is deadly serious, pay attention way that adults use when teaching children about real dangers. Don't go near the shore after dark. If you hear hoofbeats and you're alone, run for the nearest burn. Never, ever mock the Nuckelavee. Even speaking its name casually invites misfortune. These lessons were reinforced with stories of real people, neighbors, relatives, people the children's grandparents knew who had encountered the creature, who had died because they didn't follow the rules. The Nuckelavee shaped language too. Orcadian dialect had specific words and phrases related to the creature. Nuckelavee weather described the particular combination of mist, cold, and still air that preceded encounters. Burned, past tense of burn, a stream was used to indicate safety. I'm burned meant you'd crossed a stream and were protected. Even curses and blessings referenced it. May the Nuckelavee take you was a serious curse, not said lightly. May you stay burned was a blessing, wishing someone safety. The legend also created social cohesion. Everyone shared the same fear. Everyone followed the same rules. It didn't matter if you were wealthy or poor, young or old. The Nuckelavee threatened everyone equally. This created a kind of egalitarian caution. The laird of the manor was just as vulnerable as the crofter. Rich people couldn't buy safety. Authority didn't grant immunity. You survived the same way everyone else did, by being careful and a little bit lucky. Now let's compare the Nuckelavee to other water demons in Celtic and Norse mythology, because it exists in a broader context of aquatic horror. The Kelpie is probably the most famous Scottish water horse. Unlike the Nuckelavee, the Kelpie is a shapeshifter. In its true form, it's a horse, beautiful, sleek, inviting. It appears near rivers and lochs, and when someone tries to mount it, their hands stick to its hide. The Kelpie then drags them into the water to drown and devour them. The Kelpie is dangerous through trickery. The Nuckelavee is dangerous through direct assault. The Kelpie needs you to make a mistake. The Nuckelavee just needs you to be there. The Each-Witch is the Kelpie's more dangerous cousin. It inhabits both fresh and salt water, making it harder to avoid. It's also more powerful and more aggressive, but it still relies on the same trick appearing as a beautiful horse, then drowning its victims. The Nuckelavee doesn't bother with beauty. It's so horrifying that no one would approach willingly. Its power is in being undeniably, unmistakably monstrous. In Irish mythology, there's the Abhartach, a dwarf vampire creature that rose from the grave to terrorize the living. It could be killed, but only by being buried upside down with a sword through its heart. The Abhartach is vulnerable. The Nuckelavee is not. Norse mythology contributes the knack or neck, water spirits that drown people, often by luring them with beautiful music or by appearing as attractive humans. Again, trickery. Again, something you can potentially avoid by recognizing the deception. The Nuckelavee is unique in Celtic Norse mythology for several reasons. 1. No shapeshifting. What you see is what you get. Horror incarnate. 2. No seduction or trickery. It doesn't need to fool you. It overpowers you. 3. Environmental destruction. Most water demons just kill individuals. The Nuckelavee blights entire regions. 4. No redemption or compromise. Some supernatural creatures can be bargained with. The Nuckelavee cannot. 5. Seasonal constraint. Its power waxes and wanes with the seasons, tied to the cosmic battle with the sea myther. In terms of pure horror, the Nuckelavee stands alone. Other creatures might be more famous. Everyone knows about Kelpies, but nothing else in Scottish folklore is quite as viscerally, completely nightmarish. Perhaps only the Banshee rivals it, but the Banshee is an omen, not an aggressor. She warns of death, but doesn't cause it. The Nuckelavee is the death itself, walking on 4 legs, breathing poison, and hunting you across the moors. Let's talk about name variations, because Nuckelavee isn't the only way this creature was known. In different parts of Orkney, you'd hear slight variations: Nuckelavee, Muckelavee, even Knuckle. The pronunciation shifted depending on which island you are on, which family you are talking to, how much Norse influence versus Scots influence the local dialect had retained. Shetland, the island chain northeast of Orkney, had similar legends but often used different names. Some called it Niker, closer to the Norse original. Others used Shupilti or Tangi, though these sometimes referred to different creatures entirely. Seals or sea-based shapeshifters, rather than the specific horseman demon. The lack of standardization is actually evidence of the legend's authenticity. Folklore passed down orally, across isolated islands with limited contact, naturally diverges. If every account used exactly the same name and description, that would suggest later standardization, probably from written sources. But the variations prove this was alive in oral tradition. Each community kept the story in their own way, adapted to their own speech patterns, their own experiences. What remained consistent across all variations was the core: skinless horse-humanoid fusion, toxic breath, vulnerability to fresh water, and association with winter and disease. The name might shift, but the nightmare stayed the same. This also meant you couldn't avoid it through technicality. You couldn't say, "Oh, I was warned about the Nuckelavee, but this is clearly a Nuckelavee, completely different thing." No, your grandparents might call it one thing, your neighbor another, but everyone knew what you meant. The creature with no skin, the demon from the sea, the one you don't speak about casually. That one. Why doesn't the Nuckelavee have a redemption arc? Why is it purely, unambiguously evil? Most folklore creatures, even terrifying ones, have some nuance. The Kelpie is dangerous, but also beautiful, almost tragic in its isolation. Selkies can fall in love with humans. Even the Banshee, harbinger of death, is just doing her job. She's not malicious. The Nuckelavee has no such depth, no tragic backstory, no moment where you think, maybe it's not so bad. It's evil. End of story. This might be because of what the Nuckelavee represents: disease, famine, environmental catastrophe. These things have no nuance. They don't discriminate. They don't care about your virtue or innocence. They just destroy. Tuberculosis doesn't care if you're a good person. Crop failure doesn't spare the righteous. Storms don't avoid the pious. Natural disasters are impersonal, inevitable, and merciless. The Nuckelavee embodies that impersonal horror. It's not punishing anyone specifically. It's not seeking revenge. It's not a wronged spirit looking for justice. It's just evil. In the same way, a plague is evil not through malice, but through its nature. This makes it more frightening in some ways. You can't reason with it. You can't appease it with offerings or behavior changes. You can't hope that being a good person will protect you. You just have to avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, you have to run. And if you can't run fast enough, you die. There's something almost modern about that kind of horror. It's existential. It's meaningless. The universe doesn't care about you. And here's the proof: galloping across the moors with one giant eye fixed on your back. Congratulations. Your folklore just became Lovecraftian before Lovecraft was born. Must be nice, thinking ancient people believed in fair and just monsters. Let's get practical. Imagine you're walking home across the Orkney moors. It's early winter, late evening. Not quite full dark, but the sun has set. The wind is cold, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. You hear something. Hoofbeats. Heavy, rhythmic, getting closer. What do? Step 1. Don't panic. Or rather, panic productively. Your body is flooding with adrenaline. Use it. Don't freeze. Movement is survival. Step 2. Identify the nearest freshwater source. This is why you should have memorized your routes. Where's the nearest burn? Which direction? How far? If you know, run for it. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. Don't try to verify what's chasing you. Assume the worst and move. Step 3. If you don't know where water is, run inland. The Nuckelavee comes from the sea. The farther inland you go, the more likely you are to cross a stream. Orkney is crisscrossed with burns. You'll find one eventually. Maybe. Step 4. Drop anything you're carrying. That basket of fish? Gone. That bag of wool? Dropped. Extra weight slows you down. Your life is worth more than your cargo. Step 5. Pray if it helps you run. Say the Lord's Prayer. Make the sign of the cross. Call on any saint you can remember. Not because prayer definitely works, but because it gives your conscious mind something to do while your legs handle the running. Step 6. If you see the creature, don't look directly at it. This isn't verified in every account, but several survivors mentioned that making eye contact, especially with that single enormous eye, creates a kind of paralysis. A freezing up. Your brain can't process what it's seeing and stalls. Keep the creature in your peripheral vision if you must. but focus on where you're running. Step 7. When you reach water, cross it completely. Don't just touch it. Don't stop at the edge. Wade through. Jump over. Get to the other side. The barrier only works if there's water between you and the creature. Step 8. Keep moving for a while after crossing. The Nuckelavee will stop at the water, but it will wait and watch. Put distance between yourself and that stream. Get far enough away that even if it finds a way around, you've got a head start. Step 9. Don't go home immediately if home is isolated. Head for a neighbor's house, somewhere with other people. The Nuckelavee seems to prefer lone targets. Groups offer some safety, even if they can't directly fight the creature. Step 10. Tell people what happened. Not because they need to believe you, but because warnings might save someone else. If the Nuckelavee is active in an area, everyone needs to know. Step 11. Avoid that area for the rest of winter. The Nuckelavee remembers. If it targeted you once, it might do so again. Change your routes. Adjust your habits. Survival over convenience. Step 12. Wait for summer. The sea mither will eventually restrain the creature again. Once Midsummer's Eve passes, you're safe. Until next autumn. These aren't guarantees. People who followed all these steps still died, but they improved your odds. And in a world where you're facing a supernatural predator that can't be killed, improving your odds is the best you can hope for. The written record of the Nuckelavee begins properly in the 19th century, but the stories were already ancient by then. Folklorists like Walter Traill Dennison arrived in Orkney during a time when oral tradition was still strong, when the old people remembered the old ways, and when belief in the supernatural hadn't yet been completely eroded by industrialization and scientific rationality. Dennison's 1891 collection, Orkney Folklore and Traditions, is the primary source for most of what we know about the Nuckelavee. He interviewed elderly Orcadians, many of whom claimed to have heard first-hand accounts from people who'd encountered the creature, or who claimed to have encountered it themselves. One account stands out for its detail and terror. An old man named James, no surname given, as was common in these collections to protect privacy, told Dennison about an experience from his youth. James had been returning from a night of fishing. This was late spring, technically past the Nuckelavee's most active season, but the sea mither hadn't yet fully reclaimed her dominance. Dangerous time. Transitional time. The fog rolled in thick off the water. James knew the path well, had walked it hundreds of times. But fog disorients. Sound behaves strangely. Distance becomes unreliable. He heard breathing first, not his own. Something massive, labored, wet. The kind of breathing that comes from lungs that aren't working quite right. And underneath it, a rattling sound, like chains dragging, or bones scraping against each other. James stopped walking. The breathing continued. Closer now. He could feel warmth in the air, body heat from something large. And then the smell hit him. He described it as worse than 1,000 rotting seals. Sulfur mixed with dead fish, mixed with something sweet and wrong. The smell coated his throat, made him gag. He ran. Didn't see what was chasing him, the fog was too thick. But he heard it. The hoofbeats, the breathing, that horrible rattling. He knew there was a burn ahead. Small one, barely a trickle in dry weather. But it had been raining. It should be running. Should be. He found it more by luck than memory. His foot splashed into cold water, and he kept going, stumbling across, falling on the far bank, scrambling up muddy slopes until he was well beyond the stream. The sound stopped, just like that, cut off as if someone had closed a door. James didn't go back to check. He went home, told his wife what happened. She made him sleep with an iron poker by the bed for a week. He never fished at night again. Not once. Even decades later, when he was telling this story to Dennison, his hands shook. "I didn't see it," he said, "but I heard it. And I smelled it. And that was enough." Denison recorded this matter-of-factly. No skepticism, no condescension, just documentation. Because in 1891 Orkney, you didn't mock people for believing in the Nuckelavee. Too many people had stories. Too many people knew someone who died under mysterious circumstances near the shore in winter. The fog, the breathing, the smell, these details appear in multiple accounts. They're consistent. Either there's a shared cultural script everyone was following, or people were genuinely experiencing something that manifested in these specific ways. Which explanation you choose says more about your worldview than about the Nuckelavee. Let's talk about how the Nuckelavee appeared in Orcadian literature and art, because even though the islands were remote, they weren't culturally isolated. Poetry, particularly. Orkney had a strong tradition of oral poetry, and the Nuckelavee featured prominently. These weren't children's rhymes. They were serious, often dark verses that warned and remembered. One fragment, preserved in Denison's collection. When the mither sleeps beneath the foam, and winter's grasp holds fast the home, the skinless one comes up from brine, with poison breath and eye malign. Simple, direct, effective. The kind of verse that sticks in your memory, which was the point. Oral cultures use poetry as a mnemonic device. Rhythm and rhyme make information easier to remember and transmit. Children learn these verses, not as entertainment, but as education. The same way you might teach a child, stop, drop, and roll, or stranger danger. Orcadian children learned the signs of the Nuckelavee and how to survive. Visual art was rarer. Orkney wasn't wealthy. Most people didn't commission paintings or sculptures. But there are a few interesting examples. Some gravestones from the 18th and 19th centuries feature carvings that might be related to the Nuckelavee. Abstract designs showing waves, horses, or strange hybrid creatures. Nothing explicitly labeled, but the symbolism is suggestive. One stone in particular, from a cemetery near Stromness, shows what appears to be a horse rising from stylized waves, with a human figure merged into its back. The carving is weathered, details hard to make out, but locals swear it's the Nuckelavee. Why would you put the Nuckelavee on a gravestone? Protection, possibly. The idea that acknowledging the demon, showing you know, and respect its power, might keep it from disturbing the dead, or might prevent the deceased from becoming something like the Nuckelavee themselves. There's also the tradition of scare stones, flat rocks carved with frightening images and placed at boundaries. Property lines between fields at crossroads. These were apotropaic magic. You scare away evil with representations of something equally or more evil. Some of these stones might have depicted the Nuckelavee, though time and weather have erased most details. What remains are vague horse shapes, human shapes, combinations that don't quite make sense. In the 20th century, as Orkney became more connected to the wider world, the Nuckelavee started appearing in more deliberate art. Local painters created dramatic scenes of the creature emerging from waves. Sculptors made small figurines, sold to tourists as curiosities. But these modern representations often sanitized the horror, made it picturesque. A scary story for outsiders, not a genuine belief for locals. The real artistic power of the Nuckelavee was always in the oral tradition, in the way an old person's voice would drop when they spoke the name, in the pause before describing what it looked like, in the careful, deliberate way they'd explain the rules for survival. That was the art, the performance of belief, the transmission of fear that kept people alive. Christianity arrived in Orkney around the 6th century CE, and the church had complicated feelings about local folklore. On one hand, anything supernatural that wasn't explicitly Christian was potentially demonic. On the other hand, completely dismissing local beliefs was a good way to alienate the population. The solution was adaptation and recontextualization. The Nuckelavee was reframed as a demon, not a god, not a neutral force of nature, but an actual servant of Satan. This fit neatly into Christian cosmology. The world was locked in spiritual warfare between God and the devil. The Nuckelavee was one of the devil's weapons. This reframing had several effects. First, it validated the fear. People weren't being superstitious, believing in the Nuckelavee. They were correctly identifying demonic activity. The church didn't tell them, monsters aren't real. It told them that monster is a demon, and here's how you fight demons. Prayer, faith, sacraments. Second, it centralized spiritual authority. You couldn't just use folk remedies or old Norse charms. You needed Christian prayer. You needed the church. Belief in the Nuckelavee could drive people toward Christianity rather than away from it. Third, it created a framework for explaining why the Nuckelavee existed. In pre-Christian belief, it was just part of the world. Dangerous, yes, but not necessarily meaningful. Under Christianity, it existed as punishment for sin, or as a test of faith, or as part of God's mysterious plan. Ministers would preach about the Nuckelavee, use it as an example in sermons. Just as the Nuckelavee brings pestilence to the body, sin brings pestilence to the soul. Just as fresh water protects from the demon, baptism protects from damnation. The parallels were heavy-handed but effective. Some ministers went further, claiming that the Nuckelavee only attacked the faithless, that true Christians, living righteously, were immune. This was dangerous theology. It meant that if you were attacked, it was your fault. You weren't faithful enough. You weren't righteous enough. Victim blaming dressed in theological language. Other ministers were more honest. They admitted the Nuckelavee was indiscriminate. Evil doesn't care about your virtue. But they emphasized that faith gave you strength to endure. Prayer helped you think clearly during terror. Christian community meant you weren't facing danger alone. This was probably more accurate and more helpful. There were also attempts to Christianize the sea myther, though these were less successful. She didn't fit neatly into Christian framework. Too powerful, too independent, too explicitly female in a religion that emphasized male authority. Some tried to connect her to the Virgin Mary. Both were mothers, both protected, both were associated with the sea, Mary as Stella Maris, star of the sea. But the sea myther's yearly battle with the Nuckelavee didn't really map onto anything in Christian theology, so she remained somewhat separate, acknowledged but not fully absorbed. A remnant of older belief that Christianity couldn't quite eliminate. The Nuckelavee, though? The church was happy to claim that one. A useful demon. A teachable monster. Proof that the spiritual realm was real and that you needed the church to navigate it. Good luck finding theological consistency in folklore. The church tried its best, but belief is messier than doctrine. The Nuckelavee didn't exist in isolation. Orkney folklore is populated with multiple supernatural entities, and they interact in interesting ways. The Trolls, for instance. These are Orkney's version of trolls, small, humanoid, living in mounds and underground spaces. They're tricksters, sometimes helpful, but usually mischievous. They steal babies, replace them with changelings, lead travelers astray. But even the Trolls fear the Nuckelavee. In some stories, Trolls won't emerge from their mounds during Nuckelavee season. They stay underground, doors sealed, waiting for the sea myther to reclaim control. The Nuckelavee is so toxic, so fundamentally wrong, that even other supernatural beings avoid it. There's a story about a Troll who mocked the Nuckelavee, thought itself clever and safe in its mound. The Nuckelavee couldn't enter. Iron nails sealed the door. Rowan branches hung over the entrance, but it could breathe its poison breath into the mound's ventilation. The Troll sickened and died. The other Trolls learned the lesson. Don't test the Nuckelavee. Then there's the Selkies, seal people who can shed their skins to become human. They're generally benevolent, or at least neutral. Tragic figures often, caught between sea and land, never fully belonging to either. Selkies avoid the Nuckelavee, too. Some stories claim the Nuckelavee hunts Selkies specifically, seeing them as competitors for the sea's resources. Others say selkies can sense when the Nuckelavee is active and simply stay in seal form. Dive deep, wait it out. There's even a tale of a selkie warning a fisherman about the Nuckelavee's approach. The selkie surfaced, spoke in human voice, told the man to go home immediately. He listened, survived, and left offerings on the beach for the selkie for the rest of his life. The Finnfolk, another type of supernatural being, sorcerers who lived on the phantom island of Finnfolkaheme, supposedly had magical protections against the Nuckelavee. They could create barriers of force that the demon couldn't cross. But Finnfolk were rare and capricious. You couldn't count on their help. Even the sea itself seemed to react to the Nuckelavee. Fishermen reported that when the creature was active, fish wouldn't bite. Seals disappeared. Seabirds flew inland, away from the coast. Nature recognized wrongness and responded accordingly. The Nuckelavee was the apex predator of Orcadian folklore. Everything else, supernatural or natural, gave it space, respected its power, survived by avoiding it. This hierarchy reflects something true about fear. Some threats are so overwhelming that they become organizing principles. Everything else arranges itself in relation to the biggest danger. In Orkney, that danger was the Nuckelavee, and even the monsters knew it. Now let's talk about the seasonal rituals Orcadians used to mark the Nuckelavee's coming and going. Autumn equinox, around September 22nd, was treated with nervous anticipation. This was when the sea mither and the Nuckelavee were said to battle. The day itself wasn't necessarily dangerous, but it marked the transition. Summer's protection was ending. Winter's threat was beginning. Some families performed cleansing rituals on this day. They'd walk the boundaries of their property, carrying lit torches, symbolically creating a barrier. They'd sprinkle fresh water from local streams around their homes. They'd hang rowan branches, considered protective against evil, over doors and windows. These rituals weren't officially sanctioned by the church, but ministers generally looked the other way. Better to let people feel they were doing something than to have them paralyzed by fear. Midsummer's Eve, June 20th or 21st, was celebration. The sea mither had fully defeated the Nuckelavee. He was bound, chained beneath the waves. For the next few months, the coast was safe. People would gather at beaches for bonfires. They'd dance, sing, tell stories. Some would deliberately walk coastal paths at night, something unthinkable in winter, just to prove they could, to celebrate freedom from fear. Young people would dare each other to swim in the sea after dark. Couples would walk to remote beaches. The Nuckelavee's absence created a temporary window of recklessness, of joy, of life lived without constant vigilance. But even during midsummer celebrations, you'd occasionally see an older person staring out at the dark water, face worried, because they remembered. They knew autumn would come. The cycle would continue. The demon would return. Winter solstice, December 21st, was the darkest, most dangerous night. The Nuckelavee was at peak power. The sea mither was at her weakest. No one traveled if they could help it. Families stayed together, doors barred, fires burning. Some families practiced what they called keeping the light. They'd maintain a candle or lamp burning all night, never letting it go out. The belief was that continuous light, like running water, created a barrier. Darkness invited the Nuckelavee. Light repelled it. Others stayed awake the entire night, taking shifts, making sure someone was always alert. Not that being awake would help if the Nuckelavee attacked, but sleep felt like vulnerability, like lowering your defenses. Spring equinox, around March 20th, was relief. The sea mither was recovering. The Nuckelavee was weakening. The worst was over. People would bring offerings to the shore, flowers, bread, sometimes coins or small personal items. These weren't for the Nuckelavee. You didn't thank a demon, but for the sea mither. Gratitude for her return. Encouragement for her strength. Some would say prayers at the water's edge. Ask for protection during the next summer. ask for good fishing, safe travels, healthy livestock, and they'd look for signs. Was the water calmer than yesterday? Were the birds returning to the cliffs? Did the air feel different, lighter, warmer, less oppressive? These signs told them the transition was real. The danger was receding. They'd survived another winter. Until next year. These rituals gave structure to fear. They marked time. They created community. Everyone following the same calendar, sharing the same concerns, supporting each other through the dangerous seasons. Lovely. Your yearly calendar was organized around demon activity. That's comforting. The Nuckelavee legend evolved over the centuries, adapting to social and cultural changes while maintaining its essential character. In the Viking Age, when Norse influence was strongest, the creature was probably more closely tied to Norse water spirits. The Nak, the Niker, these were the ancestor forms. But as Orkney's culture became more distinctly Scots, more Christian, more isolated from Norway, the legend adapted. It became less shapeshifter, more fixed form, less trickster, more pure threat. The Norse spirits often had complicated relationships with humans, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful. The Nuckelavee dropped all ambiguity. During the medieval period, when plague repeatedly devastated Scotland, the Nuckelavee took on stronger associations with disease. Its poisonous breath became central to the legend. The creature wasn't just physically dangerous, it was pestilence incarnate. This made sense. Plague was mysterious, terrifying, seemingly random. It killed indiscriminately. It poisoned the air, or so people thought. The miasma theory of disease, which blamed illness on bad air, fit perfectly with the Nuckelavee's toxic breath. The legend gave people something to blame, something to direct their fear toward. You couldn't see plague germs. You couldn't fight a virus. But you could understand the Nuckelavee. And understanding, even of something horrifying, is better than incomprehension. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as Orkney became more connected to mainland Scotland and England, the legend faced new pressures. Education arrived. Newspapers, books, people who traveled to cities and seen the wider world. Some returned skeptical. They'd seen that the outside world didn't believe in monsters. That modern, educated people explained things through science, not superstition. But skepticism is hard to maintain when you're alone on a coastal path at night. When the fog rolls in, when you hear something breathing in the darkness that sounds like no animal you've ever known, many who left as skeptics returned as believers. Or at least as people who wouldn't test the boundaries, who'd follow the old rules just to be safe. The legend also adapted to new technology. When gas lamps arrived in Orkney's larger towns, people noted that the Nuckelavee avoided well-lit areas. When telegraph lines went up, there were reports that the creature wouldn't cross under them. Something about the metal, the electricity, created a barrier. These adaptations kept the legend alive. It wasn't frozen in medieval thinking. It updated, modernized, found ways to remain relevant even as the world changed. By the early 20th century, the Nuckelavee had entered a new phase: tourism. Folklorists, anthropologists, and curious visitors came to Orkney specifically to hear the old stories. They paid locals to tell tales, to describe encounters, to perform belief. This created complicated dynamics. Was the person telling the story a genuine believer? Or were they entertaining tourists? Could it be both? Some locals resented the tourism, felt their beliefs were being mocked, commodified. Others saw opportunity. If mainlanders wanted to hear about the Nuckelavee, why not tell them? Why not sell postcards and trinkets? The legend became simultaneously more famous and less feared. Everyone knew the name Nuckelavee, but fewer people genuinely organized their lives around avoiding it. Or so it seemed, because even today, if you talk to older Orcadians in the right context, in a pub late at night, or on a fishing boat, or during a storm, some will tell you they still believe, still follow the old cautions. still won't walk certain coastal paths after dark. Modern sightings are rare, or at least rarely reported. Who wants to be the person claiming they saw a mythological demon in the 21st century? But they happen, quietly, usually shared only among friends or family, not broadcast publicly. There's an account from the 1960s documented in a local newspaper, though treated more as curiosity than serious news. A man driving along the coast road late at night claimed something ran alongside his car for nearly a mile. He described it as horse-like, but wrong, too big, moving wrong. And he could smell something foul even through his closed car windows. He accelerated. The thing kept pace. Only when he crossed a bridge over a stream did it fall back. He reported it to police. They found no evidence, no tracks, no damage, but they didn't dismiss him either. Just made a note, filed it away. In the 1980s, a group of teenagers camping on a beach said they heard something during the night. Heavy footsteps, labored breathing, the sound of something large moving through water. They stayed in their tents, terrified, until dawn. When they emerged, they found large indentations in the sand near the waterline. Hoof prints, they thought, but too big, too deep. They took photos. The prints are ambiguous. Could be anything. Could be hooves. Could be rocks that happen to create hoof-shaped depressions. Could be the teenagers' own fabrication. But they never camped on that beach again. None of them. More recently, within the last decade, there have been reports on local message boards and social media. People claiming to have smelled the characteristic foul odor near the coast during winter. Others reporting strange sounds at night. Breathing. Rattling. Movement in the darkness beyond their lights. These are dismissed, mostly. Attributed to seals, wind, fishing boats, natural phenomena. And maybe that's what they are. But the people making the reports don't always sound like they're making things up. They sound genuinely disturbed, genuinely frightened. And often, they're not young people seeking attention. They're middle-aged locals, fishermen, farmers, people who've lived in Orkney all their lives and know the difference between a seal and something else. One woman, interviewed for a documentary about Orcadian folklore in 2015, spoke carefully, chose her words deliberately. "I don't know if I believe in the Nuckelavee," she said, "but I've smelled something near the shore in winter that I can't explain. And I've heard things I can't explain. And I follow my grandmother's rules about not going out after dark near the water. Not because I necessarily believe, but because. Why take the chance? That's modern belief. Hedged, uncertain, but operative. You might not swear the Nuckelavee exists, but you act as if it might. Pascal's wager for folklore. The cost of belief is low, just some minor cautions. The cost of being wrong if you don't believe is potentially very high, so you follow the rules. Just in case. Perfect. Your risk assessment now includes skinless horse demons. How reassuring. Let's talk about the psychology of environmental horror, because the Nuckelavee is ultimately about environment turning hostile. Orkney's landscape is harsh. Beautiful, yes, but harsh. Treeless. Windswept. The weather changes in minutes. What was clear sky becomes blinding storm. What was calm sea becomes killing waves. Living here requires constant vigilance. Constant awareness that nature is not your friend. That the environment is actively trying to kill you, or at least deeply indifferent to whether you live or die. This creates a particular psychology. You develop keen observation skills. You learn to read clouds, wind patterns, the behavior of birds and seals. You know details that mainlanders would miss, because those details keep you alive. And when something seems wrong, when the patterns break, when the environment behaves in ways you can't explain, your brain alerts, hard. The Nuckelavee embodies that wrongness. It's the environment made monstrous. The sea, which provides food but also drowns people. The wind, which powers boats but also destroys them. The fog, which disorients and hides danger. All of that concentrated into a single entity, mobile, hostile, targeting you specifically. This is different from human threats. You can reason with humans. You can fight them. Even when humans are dangerous, they follow human logic. Environmental threats don't. A storm doesn't care about your virtue. A tsunami doesn't negotiate. And the Nuckelavee, as environmental disaster personified, operates on environmental logic. Indiscriminate, overwhelming, inevitable. This creates a specific flavor of horror. Helplessness. You can't argue with a flood. You can't beg a hurricane to spare you. You can only try to survive. And accept that sometimes you won't. The Nuckelavee legend teaches this acceptance. It says, the world is dangerous. You are small. Do everything right, and you might still die. Do everything wrong, and you might survive. There's randomness. There's unfairness. But there are also rules, small rules, fresh water, seasonal awareness, community. These won't guarantee survival, but they improve odds. That's as much comfort as you get. Modern psychology recognizes this as a form of terror management. Humans need to feel some control over their mortality. We create rituals, beliefs, systems that give us the illusion of agency, even when faced with forces vastly beyond our control. The Nuckelavee rituals did that. Cross the stream. Carry iron. Recite prayers. These actions probably didn't actually repel demons, but they gave people something to do besides freeze and panic. And action is survival. Even ritual action. Even action based on folklore rather than science. Because the psychology of survival is often more important than the mechanics. The Nuckelavee shares thematic DNA with plague mythology across cultures. Let's explore those connections. In European medieval thought, plague was often personified, sometimes as a skeletal figure death riding a pale horse, sometimes as a dark angel, spreading disease with every touch, sometimes as a miasma, a visible cloud of corruption drifting through towns. The Nuckelavee fits this pattern perfectly. Its plague-given form, its breath spreads disease. Its presence causes environmental decay. Its death on four legs. But it's more specific than generic plague demons. The Nuckelavee is tied to place, Orkney's coasts. Tied to season, winter's dark months. Tied to specific symptoms, respiratory disease, wasting sickness, crop failure. This specificity suggests the legend might have roots in actual disease outbreaks. Orkney experienced multiple plague waves throughout medieval and early modern periods. Isolated communities are particularly vulnerable. One ship-bringing infection can devastate an entire island. The pattern would have been: winter arrives, trade with mainland decreases, isolation increases. Then spring comes, ships return, and sometimes they bring sickness. People die. Crops fail because there aren't enough hands to work them, or because disease disrupts farming cycles. The correlation between seasonal change and disease outbreak creates a causal narrative. Winter weakens the sea mither. The Nuckelavee is freed. Disease follows. It's not accurate epidemiology, but it's comprehensible storytelling. Other cultures have similar plague demons. In Slavic folklore, there's Marina or Marzana, a winter demon associated with death and disease. In Hindu mythology, Mariamman is a goddess of plague, both causing and curing disease, depending on how she's propitiated. What makes the Nuckelavee unique is its physicality. Many plague spirits are invisible, or appear as humans, or manifest as environmental phenomena. The Nuckelavee is viscerally, disgustingly physical. You can see its muscles, smell its corruption, hear its breathing. This makes it more terrifying in some ways. Invisible threats can be anywhere, but visible threats, ones you can potentially see and avoid, create different dynamics. They make geography matter. Coastlines become danger zones. fresh water becomes sacred boundary. Wonderful. Your plague mythology has no redemption arc. That'll help you sleep. The Sea Myther's mythology doesn't exist in isolation. She's part of a broader cosmological understanding that Orcadians had about their world, one where the ocean isn't just water, but a living entity with moods, intentions, and power. In Orkney tradition, the ocean has layers of meaning. The surface is what sailors navigate. The depths are where the drowned go. And somewhere in between is a realm of supernatural beings that mediate between human and divine, between living and dead, between order and chaos. The Sea Myther represents benevolent order. The Nuckelavee represents malevolent chaos. But there are other beings in this cosmology too. Seal people, selkies, merfolk, water horses, each wischt, and trolls, Orkney's version of trolls. These beings aren't just monsters. They're part of an ecological understanding. Selkies represented the mystery of seals, creatures that seemed almost human in their intelligence, their eyes, their cries. Merfolk represented the dangerous allure of the sea itself. Each wischt represented the risk of fresh water, rivers that could flash flood, lakes that could drown the unwary. The Nuckelavee fits into this system as the ultimate expression of oceanic danger. If selkies are mysterious and each wischt are treacherous, the Nuckelavee is catastrophic. It's not just a threat to individuals, but to entire communities. This makes the Sea Myther's role even more important. She's not fighting minor supernatural nuisances. She's containing an extinction-level threat. Her battle with the Nuckelavee isn't just seasonal change. It's the difference between survival and annihilation. That's reassuring. Your ocean has a nuclear option. Perfect. The timing of the Sea Myther's victory is significant. It happens at spring, specifically around the spring equinox, late March or early April in Orkney. This is when the weather actually does improve. Days lengthen significantly. The sun rises higher in the sky, providing more warmth. The worst of the winter storms have passed. The ocean, while still cold, becomes more navigable, but it's also when the work intensifies. Fields must be prepared, crops planted, fishing expeditions increase. The community mobilizes after the relative dormancy of winter. If the Nuckelavee were still active during this time, that work would be impossible. Fields would be poisoned. Fish would be tainted. Disease would spread just as people's immune systems were already stressed from winter privation and the sudden increase in physical labor. The Sea Myther's victory makes survival possible. Without her intervention, spring wouldn't bring renewal. It would bring catastrophe. This creates a deep psychological association. Spring isn't just warmer weather. It's divine protection. The Sea Myther's triumph isn't just mythology. It's lived experience. People feel safer because they genuinely believe she's fighting for them. And honestly, that belief might have practical value. If people believe they're protected during spring and summer, they're more likely to take the calculated risks necessary for survival. Going out on fishing boats, working in fields far from shelter, trading with other islands. Fear is useful for avoiding danger, but too much fear is paralyzing. The Sea Myther mythology calibrates that fear. It says, yes, the danger is real and terrible, but it's also contained for most of the year. Act accordingly. Lovely. Your ocean goddess is basically a psychological coping mechanism. How comforting. But the Sea Myther can't hold the Nuckelavee forever. Come autumn, specifically around the autumn equinox in late September or early October, the balance shifts. The stories say the Nuckelavee's power grows as winter approaches. The Sea Myther weakens. Their battle intensifies again, and eventually, inevitably, the Nuckelavee breaks free. This marks the beginning of the dangerous season. Days shorten. Storms return. The ocean becomes treacherous again. And somewhere out there, freed from its prison, the Nuckelavee roams. This is when the protective rituals intensify. Rowan branches above every door. Iron horseshoes on every threshold. Fresh water blessed and kept ready. Communities draw inward. Travel decreases. Shore work becomes minimal. The autumn timing also aligns with harvest. This is when communities must gather and store enough food to survive winter. The work is intense, exhausting, and time-sensitive. A bad harvest means starvation. If the Nuckelavee is active during harvest, it can poison crops, kill livestock, sicken workers. The stakes are existential. A single Nuckelavee appearance during harvest could doom an entire community to a winter of slow death. So the protective rituals aren't just about avoiding the monster. They're about ensuring survival. Every rowan branch is a prayer for a successful harvest. Every iron horseshoe is a ward against winter famine. The mythology becomes inseparable from the agricultural calendar. You can't understand the Nuckelavee without understanding harvest. You can't understand harvest without understanding the Nuckelavee. Good luck with that. Your food security depends on appeasing a skinless horse demon. Wonderful. Let's talk about the specific accounts that survived into the modern era, because these stories weren't abstract. They were personal. People claimed to have seen this thing, encountered it, survived it, barely. Walter Trail Denison's 1891 collection preserves several of these accounts. The most famous is the story of an old man named James, who claimed to have encountered the Nuckelavee in his youth. James had been returning home from night fishing. Late spring, technically past the Nuckelavee's peak season, but transitions are dangerous times. The sea myther's control isn't absolute yet. Heavy fog rolled in off the water. James knew the path well, had walked it hundreds of times, but fog disorients. Sounds behave strangely. Distance becomes unreliable. He heard breathing first. Deep, labored, wet breathing. Like something drowning, but still moving. He froze, trying to locate the source. Then he smelled it. Rot and brine, and something worse, something chemical, like blood gone black. The smell was so strong, it made his eyes water, made his throat close. The fog shifted, and he saw it. The Nuckelavee was standing perhaps 20 yards away, completely motionless. Just standing there in the fog, breathing, watching. James described the single eye in the human-like head as enormous. Too large for the skull, protruding slightly, bloodshot, and worst of all, completely aware. This wasn't an animal. This was something intelligent. Something that knew exactly what it was looking at and found it amusing. The horse head beneath was skeletal, lipless, all teeth exposed in a permanent grin. Vapor or steam rose from the exposed muscle tissue covering both torsos. The arms were too long. The fingers ended in black nails like talons. James stood absolutely still. The Nuckelavee swayed slightly, as if testing the air, or perhaps simply moving, because its grotesque body couldn't remain completely stationary. Then it took a step toward him. James ran. He ran blindly through the fog, away from the path, away from any landmarks, pure panic-driven flight. He could hear it behind him, the wet sound of exposed muscle moving, the wheezing breath, the scrape of hooves on stone. He reached a stream. Small thing, barely 2 feet wide, probably couldn't stop a determined horse on a normal day. James leaped across it and kept running, crashing through the dark until he physically couldn't run anymore. He collapsed, chest heaving, and waited for the horror to catch up. It didn't come. He waited in silence, terrified, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the fog lifted enough to see. He was miles from where he'd meant to be, completely disoriented. When he finally found his way back to the path, he approached the stream cautiously. On the other side, clearly visible in the soft earth, were marks. Not quite hoofprints, the shape was wrong, too splayed, too deep. But they led right up to the water's edge and stopped. The Nuckelavee had been pursuing him, would have caught him, but it stopped at the stream. The fresh water saved his life. James lived for another 60 years after this encounter. He told the story to anyone who would listen, with the same insistence every time. Fresh water saved him. Fresh water stopped it. And anyone who didn't believe him was a fool who wouldn't survive their own encounter. That's comforting. Your survival story relies on happening to run in exactly the right direction. Perfect odds. Another account, less famous but equally terrifying, comes from a woman named Mary. No surname preserved, but Denison collected her story in the same period. Mary was a midwife. This meant late-night travel, sometimes to isolated crofts, often in terrible weather. You didn't become a midwife in Orkney without courage and a certain fatalism about danger. She was returning from a difficult birth. Mother and baby both survived, which was victory enough, when she heard something moving parallel to her path. This was winter, deep night, the most dangerous season. She couldn't see it at first, just heard it moving through the darkness. Heavy footsteps, labored breathing, and then that smell, rot and brine and corruption. Mary knew immediately what it was. She didn't run. Running triggers pursuit. She'd heard the stories, remembered the lessons. She kept walking, steady pace, eyes forward, pretending she hadn't noticed, pretending she was just another cold woman returning home from a difficult night's work. The thing kept pace with her, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always present. She could hear the wet sound of its movement, could smell the rot getting stronger when it came closer. She reached a crossroads. 4 paths, ancient stones marking the intersection, and crucially, a small burn running alongside one path. Fresh water flowing freely. Mary chose the path beside the water, walked along it, keeping the stream always to her left. As sounds of pursuit stopped, she didn't look back, didn't stop, kept walking beside that stream for 2 miles until she reached the edge of her village, where the first houses stood and lights burned in windows. Only then did she look back. Nothing, just darkness and the sound of running water. But in the morning, when people checked the paths, they found marks, not hoofprints, not footprints, something between them, something wrong. They followed those marks backward from the crossroads and found them leading from the shore, following Mary's original path, stopping exactly where the stream began. Mary never traveled at night in winter again. She still worked as a midwife, still answered calls, but in winter she either arrived before dark or didn't go at all. Some called this cowardice. Most called it wisdom. Must be nice. Your healthcare system involves outrunning demons. Fantastic infrastructure. A third account, this one from a fisherman named Tam, involves a boat. Tam and his crew were returning from a successful fishing expedition. Late autumn, dangerous season, but the catch had been excellent, and they delayed returning to process more fish. Classic mistake. Greed and optimism overcoming caution. The fog rolled in suddenly, as it does in Orkney. Dense, wet, disorienting. Tam was an experienced navigator, knew the coastal waters intimately, but in fog that thick, landmarks disappear. They heard something moving through the water. Large, swimming, or walking. Hard to tell. The sound was wrong for a seal, wrong for a whale, wrong for anything natural. Then the smell hit. Concentrated, sickening, the entire boat filling with the stench of rot and brine and decay. One of the crew vomited. Another began praying. Tam gripped the tiller and tried to steer away from the sound, but in the fog, direction was uncertain. Something surfaced beside the boat. Tam described it as looking like a drowned horse, but wrong. The flesh was bloated, discolored, but also appeared to be moving. Not with breath, but with something underneath. Writhing, living, and above the horse's body, rising from the water, was the upper torso of something that might once have been a man, but had no skin. Just exposed muscle tissue, gray and rotten, dripping with seawater and something darker. The head turned toward them. A single enormous eye, fixed on the boat with unmistakable intelligence. One of the crew screamed. The thing's mouth opened, black inside, teeth visible through the exposed muscle, and it made a sound. Not quite a roar, not quite a groan. Something wet and hollow and utterly inhuman. Then it began moving toward the boat. Tam did something that probably saved them all. Instead of trying to row away, which would have been useless, the thing was faster. He grabbed a bucket of their fresh water supply and threw it at the creature. The water hit the thing's exposed muscle. Where it landed, the tissue recoiled, actually pulled back as if burned. The creature made that sound again. Pain? Rage? Impossible to tell. And sank beneath the surface. The fog began to clear almost immediately. Not natural clearing, but sudden, as if the creature had been controlling it, or its presence had somehow thickened the air itself. They rowed hard for shore, not speaking, not stopping. When they landed, Tam made his crew swear never to fish that area again. They agreed instantly. The catch from that day, excellent as it was thrown back into the sea. None of them would eat fish that might have swum near that thing. Tam never went out in autumn again. Spent his remaining years as a shore fisherman, working the tide pools and small coastal waters. Some said he'd lost his nerve, but Tam knew better. He'd seen what was out there, had thrown water on it and watched it recoil. He'd fought the Nuckelavee and survived. That was enough. That was more than enough. Good luck with that. Your naval defense strategy involves throwing drinking water at demons. That'll work great. These accounts share common elements. The fog, the smell, the wrong appearance of the creature. Always described as grotesque, always skinless, always somehow worse than any description could capture. But they also share survival strategies that align with the traditional protections. Fresh water works. Rowing works. Running water creates boundaries. Iron creates barriers. This consistency across multiple accounts from different time periods and different witnesses suggests either 1. A genuine shared experience of something, not necessarily the literal Nuckelavee, but something that created these consistent descriptions and consistent responses. 2. A folklore so deeply embedded in the culture that anyone having a frightening experience near water at night would interpret it through the Nuckelavee lens and respond with the traditional protections, which would then appear to work when the frightening experience ended. 3. A combination. Real experiences of dangerous wildlife or weather phenomena, interpreted and elaborated through the cultural framework of the Nuckelavee legend, which then reinforced the legend through apparent confirmation. The truth is probably somewhere in that third option. Orkney has dangerous wildlife. Seals can be aggressive. Weather can turn deadly in minutes. Disease outbreaks happened. Crop failures occurred. Having a single explanatory framework, the Nuckelavee, that encompasses all these dangers makes them comprehensible. And having traditional protections that align with genuinely useful survival strategies, staying away from the shore in storms, maintaining fresh water supplies, living near running water that indicates healthy land, means the belief system supports survival, even if the monster itself doesn't exist. But to the people telling these stories, the monster absolutely existed. They'd seen it, smelled it, run from it, survived it, and they'd spend the rest of their lives warning others, insisting on the protections, teaching the survival strategies. Not because they were credulous or primitive, but because they'd experienced genuine terror and wanted to prevent others from experiencing the same. That's the thing about folklore. It persists not because people are stupid, but because it serves functions psychological, social, practical. The Nuckelavee legend taught survival. It explained suffering. It provided community cohesion around shared dangers. Whether the monster was real becomes almost irrelevant when the legend serves survival. Almost. The Nuckelavee legend began to decline in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Folklorists like Denison collected the stories specifically because they recognized the tradition was fading. Several factors contributed to this decline. First, population movement. Young people left Orkney for mainland Scotland or further abroad, seeking economic opportunities. The communities that maintained the Nuckelavee tradition fragmented. Second, education and modernization. Schools taught rational, scientific worldviews. The supernatural was increasingly dismissed as superstition. Believing in the Nuckelavee became associated with backwardness. Third, changing relationship with the sea. As shipping improved and industrialization progressed, the ocean became less mystical and more utilitarian. It was a resource to exploit, a route to navigate, but not a living entity with moods and monsters. Fourth, Christianity's increasing influence. While Christianity had been present in Orkney for centuries, the old beliefs had coexisted alongside it. But as Christianity became more institutionally dominant and doctrinally rigid, there was less room for pagan holdovers, like the Nuckelavee. By the mid-20th century, most Orcadians knew of the Nuckelavee only as a historical curiosity. Old stories, things their grandparents believed, quaint folklore. But the legend didn't disappear entirely. It persisted in literature, in academic studies of folklore, in children's books about Scottish monsters. The Nuckelavee became safely distant. A story, not a belief. Entertaining, not terrifying. This is the fate of most folklore as cultures modernize. Beliefs become stories. Rituals become traditions. Sacred becomes cultural. The numinous becomes the nostalgic. But something gets lost in this transition. The Nuckelavee as cultural artifact, discussed, analyzed, illustrated, is fundamentally different from the Nuckelavee as lived belief. The former is interesting. The latter was existential. When your grandmother refuses to let you go near the shore at night because she genuinely believes a skinless horse demon might kill you, that's different from reading about it in a folklore collection. The emotional weight is different. The behavioral impact is different. Modern Orkney has lost that weight. The Nuckelavee is known, but not feared. Remembered, but not believed. Except, tourism has brought the Nuckelavee back, but transformed. Orkney depends heavily on tourism. Visitors come for the archaeology. Skara Brae, the ring of Brodgar Meshow. They come for the natural beauty. The cliffs, the seabirds, the northern lights. And they come for the folklore. The Nuckelavee is marketable. It's Scotland's most horrifying monster. It's uniquely Orcadian. It's visually striking in a grotesque way. It has great stories attached. So now you can buy Nuckelavee t-shirts, Nuckelavee postcards, Nuckelavee illustrations. There are Nuckelavee walking tours, where guides tell the old stories at carefully selected spooky locations. There are Nuckelavee performances at folk festivals. This commercialization is complicated. On one hand, it preserves the legend. Young Orcadians, who might never have learned the stories, otherwise now encounter them through tourism. The mythology stays alive in public consciousness. On the other hand, it sanitizes the terror. The Nuckelavee becomes entertainment. Scary, but safely scary. The psychological weight, the genuine belief that shaped behavior and community organization, is gone. It's a performance of belief, not belief itself. Some older Orcadians dislike this. They remember when the Nuckelavee wasn't a tourist attraction, when it was something you spoke of with respect and fear, if you spoke of it at all, when the stories were warnings, not entertainment. But culture changes. Legends adapt or die. The Nuckelavee's transformation into tourist attraction might be undignified, but it ensures survival. And arguably, any survival is better than total disappearance. The irony is that modern tourism might actually help people understand the legend's original power. When you're standing on an Orkney cliff at night, wind howling, waves crashing below, fog rolling in, it's not hard to imagine something terrible emerging from that darkness. The landscape itself suggests monsters. So maybe the tourist version of the Nuckelavee, despite its commercialization, can still convey something of the original. Not belief, Exactly, but understanding. Recognition of why people believed. And occasionally, a tourist experiences something that shakes their rational worldview. They see something in the fog, smell something on the wind, feel watched. These experiences are usually brief, usually explainable, but they create a moment of genuine uncertainty. In that moment, the Nuckelavee feels real again, not as cultural artifact, but as possibility. And that's something. How lovely. Your horrific monster is now a tourist attraction. There's also a modern environmental reading of the Nuckelavee that's worth considering. The Nuckelavee is a pollution demon. It poisons water, blights crops, causes disease. In the original legend, this happened through supernatural means. The creature's inherent corruption spreading through its presence. But replace supernatural corruption with environmental degradation, and the Nuckelavee becomes eerily relevant. Modern Orkney faces environmental challenges. Climate change affects fishing patterns. Ocean acidification impacts marine ecosystems. Agricultural runoff pollutes waterways. Microplastics accumulate in the food chain. These are slow-moving disasters, mostly invisible, but with similar effects to what the Nuckelavee legend described. Fish die, crops fail, people get sick, communities suffer. The Nuckelavee could be reinterpreted as a warning about environmental collapse. The creature's seasonal return represents the cyclical nature of environmental crises. The protections, freshwater, healthy boundaries, community cooperation map onto modern environmental solutions. This reading isn't what the original storytellers intended. They weren't crafting environmental parables. But legends can acquire new meanings without losing their old ones. The Nuckelavee worked as plague demon, as storm god, as evil spirit. It can also work as environmental metaphor, and maybe that's how it survives into the 21st century. Not as literal belief, not as tourist entertainment, but as symbolic warning. A reminder that the ocean is powerful, that nature has limits, that our actions have consequences. The Nuckelavee, in this reading, never actually went away. It just changed form. It's not a skinless horse demon emerging from the fog. It's the slow accumulation of plastic in the ocean. It's the gradual warming of waters, pushing fish species further north. It's the acidification dissolving coral and shells. It's still pollution, still death, still the consequence of human activity disrupting natural balance. The sea myther isn't fighting anymore, or if she is, she's losing. The Nuckelavee is free year-round now, and we invited it in. That's a dark reading, but the Nuckelavee was always dark. The legend never promised easy solutions or happy endings. Just survival if you're careful, death if you're not. Maybe that's the lesson that still applies. Pay attention, respect the environment, maintain the protections, or face the consequences. The Nuckelavee doesn't care if you believe in it. The ocean doesn't care if you believe in it. Both will kill you regardless. Perfect. Your environmental crisis has the same solution as your demon problem. That's actually kind of apt. Let's talk about the Nuckelavee in modern media and literature, because the legend has influenced creative works beyond Orkney. The creature appears in various fantasy novels, usually as a uniquely horrifying monster. Authors are drawn to the visceral description. Exposed muscles, black blood, single eye, dual torso. It's visually distinctive in ways that most folklore monsters aren't. Neil Gaiman mentioned the Nuckelavee briefly in his short story collection, treating it as one of many examples of British folklore that's genuinely disturbing. Terry Pratchett never used it directly, but the aesthetics of certain monsters in his Discworld series, grotesque, darkly comic, more pathetic than powerful, share some Nuckelavee DNA. In gaming, the Nuckelavee appears occasionally, usually as a high-level monster or boss fight. The exposed muscle tissue translates well to video game design. It's immediately readable as damaged or corrupted. The environmental pollution aspect provides gameplay mechanics, poison damage, area denial, corrupted zones. But these adaptations almost always lose something from the original. They make the Nuckelavee fightable, defeatable. The hero encounters it, battles it, wins. The original legend doesn't work that way. You don't fight the Nuckelavee. You avoid it, or you die. There's no heroic confrontation, no narrative satisfaction, just survival through caution and luck. That's not cinematically satisfying. It doesn't fit modern story structures. Heroes are supposed to overcome obstacles, not run away from them. So media adaptations usually transform the Nuckelavee into something it originally wasn't. A challenge to be overcome rather than a force to be evaded. This changes the fundamental nature of the legend. The Nuckelavee's power comes from its inescapability. Making it escapable, let alone defeatable, removes its core terror. But this transformation also reflects modern psychology. We want problems to be solvable, monsters to be defeatable, heroes to triumph. The original Nuckelavee legend comes from a worldview where some problems aren't solvable, some forces can't be defeated. The best you can do is survive, protect your community, and pass on the warnings to the next generation. That's a harder story to sell, but it might be a more useful one. In a world facing climate change, environmental collapse, systemic crisis, problems that can't be defeated in any traditional sense, the Nuckelavee's original lesson matters. You can't kill the ocean. You can't fight pollution into submission. You can only adapt, protect, survive. Not as satisfying as the hero's journey, but possibly more realistic. Good luck with that. Your survival strategy involves accepting that some problems can't be solved. How inspirational. There are a few modern Scottish writers who've tried to capture the original Nuckelavee's horror without sanitizing it. Duncan MacLean's short fiction includes a story set in Orkney where the Nuckelavee isn't named, but is clearly present. A corruption moving through the landscape, impossible to fight, only possible to evade. Characters survive through luck and traditional knowledge passed down through generations. George Mackay Brown, the great Orcadian poet and novelist, referenced the Nuckelavee obliquely in several works. He understood the legend's function, not just to frighten, but to encode survival knowledge. His characters treat the old stories with respect, recognizing their practical value. Contemporary horror writers have occasionally attempted the Nuckelavee, usually unsuccessfully. The problem is that modern horror tends to rely on jump scares, gore, and shock value. The Nuckelavee's horror is different. It's existential, environmental, inevitable. It's not the sudden appearance that terrifies. It's knowing it exists out there. It's the slow approach through the fog. It's the smell arriving before the sight. It's the absolute certainty that if it catches you, there's no fighting, no negotiating, no last-minute escape. That's a slow-burn horror that doesn't translate well to modern media pacing. It requires building dread over time. It requires making readers feel the inevitability. The best Nuckelavee stories aren't the ones where it appears directly. They're the ones where it's always about to appear, where characters spend the entire narrative in the shadow of its potential presence, making decisions based on its existence, whether they encounter it or not. That's closer to how the legend actually functioned. Orcadians didn't encounter the Nuckelavee regularly, but they lived their lives aware of it. It shaped behavior, influenced decisions, created culture. The Nuckelavee's real power was never the encounters. It was the anticipation, the knowledge that it was out there, the understanding that safety was temporary, conditional, dependent on maintaining the proper protections and boundaries. Modern writers who capture that, who make the Nuckelavee's absence as terrifying as its presence, come closest to the legend's original power. But they're rare. Most just want the cool monster, the exposed muscle, the grotesque design. They get the aesthetics without the horror, the image without the impact. And the Nuckelavee becomes just another monster. Distinctive, sure. Gross, definitely. But ultimately safe, which is exactly what it should never be. Let's talk about the specific protective rituals in more detail, because these weren't just superstitions. They were practical survival strategies wrapped in supernatural justification. The rowan tree protection is particularly interesting. Rowan, Sorbus aucuparia, grows throughout Scotland and has bright red berries that stand out in the grey landscape. In folklore across northern Europe, rowan is associated with protection against evil spirits. But there are practical reasons for this association. Rowan trees often grow near water sources, streams, springs, wells. In pre-modern communities, knowing where rowan trees grew meant knowing where clean water could be found. Life-saving information disguised as folklore. The practice of hanging rowan branches above doorways served multiple functions. Symbolically, it warned away evil. Practically, it demonstrated that the household knew where water sources were and had the knowledge to access them. It was a marker of competence and preparation. Rowan wood is also relatively soft and easy to work with tools, making it accessible for carving protective symbols or building small structures. Communities that prioritized rowan for supernatural reasons were actually prioritizing a useful, workable wood source. The berries, while not particularly palatable, are rich in vitamin C and can be made into jam or wine. Again, practical nutrition wrapped in supernatural significance. So when grandmothers insisted on rowan above the door to ward off the Nuckelavee, they were also ensuring their families maintained knowledge of water sources, useful wood, and supplementary food supplies. The Nuckelavee protection was the motivation. The survival knowledge was the result. Congratulations, your anti-demon defense system is actually just practical forestry. The iron protection is equally layered with practical meaning. Iron horseshoes above doorways are found in folklore throughout Europe, but in Orkney specifically, iron had special significance. The islands have limited natural iron deposits, so iron objects were valuable, carefully maintained, passed down through generations. Owning iron horseshoes meant you had horses, which meant you had wealth and status. Hanging them above your door was both spiritual protection and wealth signaling, telling neighbors and potential threats that this household had resources. Iron also represented craftsmanship and trade connections. Someone had to forge that horseshoe. Either your community had a skilled blacksmith, or you had trade networks to obtain worked iron. Both indicated community strength and resilience. The superstition that iron wards off evil spirits might have emerged from the practical observation that communities with strong craft traditions and trade networks, communities that valued and maintained iron objects, were more resilient to disasters. When plague struck or famine threatened, communities with skilled craftspeople and trade connections could innovate solutions, obtain help from allies, or create new tools to address problems. Communities without these things suffered more. The iron horseshoe becomes a marker for community resilience. And resilient communities survive knuckly seasons, harsh winters, disease outbreaks, storms, better than isolated, resource-poor ones. So the folklore didn't just say, iron wards off demons. It said, maintain craft skills, value trade networks, preserve useful objects. The supernatural threat enforced practical preparation. Perfect. Your magic talisman is just economic policy. How mystical. The freshwater protection is the most directly practical. Running water, streams, burns, rivers represent several survival advantages. Fresh, drinkable water is obvious. But running water also indicates healthy land. Stagnant water breeds disease. Flowing water stays cleaner. Communities built near running water had consistent access to clean drinking water, fish, and irrigation. The land near streams is usually more fertile. The sound of running water provides acoustic cover for homes, making them less isolated and lonely. The folklore that the Nuckelavee cannot cross running water translates to stay near clean water sources, and you're less likely to die from waterborne disease. Disease patterns in pre-modern communities strongly correlated with water quality. Communities that settled near stagnant water, ponds, marshes, slow-moving rivers, experienced higher rates of dysentery, cholera, and other waterborne illnesses. Communities near flowing water, fast streams, freshwater springs stayed healthier. Lower disease rates, better nutrition, more reliable agriculture. The Nuckelavee legend enforced settlement patterns that aligned with these survival advantages. Don't live near stagnant water. The Nuckelavee haunts those places becomes a memorable way to say, stagnant water causes disease. And the practice of carrying fresh water for protection. That's just always have clean drinking water available, which remains excellent advice. The supernatural threat teaches practical hydrology. The monster enforces public health policy. Lovely. Your demon is actually just the CDC. These protective practices also created community cohesion, which is itself a survival advantage. When everyone agrees on the protective rituals, you have shared behavioral norms. Everyone hangs rowan branches. Everyone maintains iron horseshoes. Everyone respects running water boundaries. This creates predictability. You know what to expect from your neighbors. You can trust they're following the same practices you are. This builds social capital, the trust and reciprocity networks that help communities survive crises. During a harsh winter or disease outbreak, communities with strong social capital fare better. People share resources, provide mutual aid, care for the sick, and support the vulnerable. Communities without this cohesion fragment under pressure. The Nuckelavee legend creates shared identity through shared threat. Everyone in Orkney knows the Nuckelavee. Everyone follows the protections. This shared knowledge and shared practice binds the community together. Outsiders who don't know the Nuckelavee legends stand out. They don't follow the protective practices. This makes them identifiable and potentially excludable, which sounds harsh, but in resource-limited environments, community boundaries matter for survival. The legend also provides conversational material. People share Nuckelavee stories, teach children about the protections, discuss whether conditions suggest the Nuckelavee is active. This constant reinforcement keeps the legend alive and keeps the protective practices maintained. So the Nuckelavee doesn't just teach individual survival strategies. It creates and maintains the social structures that enable collective survival. The monster is social engineering. Good luck with that. Your community bonding exercise involves shared terror. Fantastic. Now let's consider the gender dynamics in the Nuckelavee. Sea myth mythology, because they're more interesting than they first appear. The sea myther is feminine, nurturing, protective, stereotypically maternal qualities. She fights to keep the community safe, sacrificing her own comfort. The battle with the Nuckelavee exhausts her to provide periods of safety. The Nuckelavee is masculine or gender ambiguous. It has a male torso, but no clear genital anatomy in the descriptions. Aggressive, destructive, stereotypically masculine qualities in their most toxic form. This could be read as straightforward gender essentialism. Feminine equals good, masculine equals bad. But that's overly simplistic. The sea myther is powerful, active, and willing to engage in violence. Her battle with the Nuckelavee is brutal. She's not passive or gentle. She's a warrior. Her femininity doesn't make her weak or submissive. The Nuckelavee's masculinity, if we read it as masculine, is sterile and destructive. It creates nothing, nurtures nothing, builds nothing. Its masculinity divorced from any productive or protective function. Pure aggression with no purpose beyond harm. So the mythology might actually be offering a critique of toxic masculinity and celebrating active, powerful femininity. The sea myther does what needs to be done. The Nuckelavee is pointless violence. Or, reading it differently, the sea myther represents human civilization, the work of maintaining safety, creating conditions for life, fighting back chaos. The Nuckelavee represents wild nature, uncaring, destructive, eternal. The gender coding becomes less about literal men and women, and more about order versus chaos, civilization versus wilderness, cultivation versus decay. In medieval Orkney, maintaining civilization required constant effort against difficult conditions. The sea myther represents that effort. She's not naturally victorious. She has to fight for every season of safety. The Nuckelavee represents the environment's constant pressure against human habitation. Storms, disease, crop failure, harsh winters, these never stop threatening. Constant vigilance is required. Gender dynamics in folklore often encode these larger struggles. The protective mother goddess versus the destructive force. Community versus isolation. Life versus death. The specifics matter to how people related to the legend, but the underlying tensions remain consistent regardless of gender interpretation. That's comforting. Your mythology either critiques toxic masculinity or represents eternal civilizational struggle. Pick your existential crisis. Before we finish, let's return to the core question. What was the Nuckelavee? If we set aside the supernatural explanation, what could have created this legend? Option 1. Misidentified animal encounters. Seals with mange can look horrifying. Exposed skin, grotesque appearance, unusual behavior. A large seal, glimpsed in fog, moving on land, which seals do, awkwardly, could be misidentified as something far worse. Add fear, poor lighting, and cultural expectations, and you get the Nuckelavee. But this doesn't fully explain the consistency of the descriptions. Multiple witnesses over centuries describing the same basic form, horse-like body with human-like torso, suggests something more than random misidentification. Option 2. Disease carriers as symbolic demons. Rats carry plague. Mosquitoes carry malaria. What if some vector, contaminated water, certain weather conditions, specific seasonal patterns, created disease outbreaks that Orcadians couldn't otherwise explain? The Nuckelavee becomes the personification of that vector. This fits better. The seasonal pattern, the association with pollution and blight, the correlation between Nuckelavee sightings and disease outbreaks all make sense if the Nuckelavee represents disease causation that pre-modern people couldn't understand literally. Option 3. Trauma symbolism. Communities that experienced catastrophic losses, plague, famine, warfare, need ways to process that trauma. Creating a monster that embodies all those catastrophes serves psychological functions. The Nuckelavee becomes the face of collective suffering. This also fits. The Nuckelavee's utter malevolence, its association with every form of destruction, its invincibility, these are trauma responses. The monster is unbearable because the suffering was unbearable. Option 4. Environmental observation. Ancient peoples were often sophisticated observers of nature. They noticed patterns modern science would later confirm. What if Orcadians noticed genuine environmental patterns, specific weather conditions preceding disease outbreaks, certain ocean states correlating with blighted crops, and personified those patterns as the Nuckelavee? The creature becomes shorthand for complex environmental causation. The Nuckelavee is active, means conditions are right for disaster. Not supernatural, but practical observation wrapped in memorable imagery. Option 5. Some combination of all these. Real animal encounters, misinterpreted through a cultural lens shaped by disease experience, trauma processing, and environmental observation, crystallizing into a coherent legend that serves multiple functions. This last option is probably closest to the truth. The Nuckelavee isn't one thing. It's a composite. Different experiences, different observations, different needs, all finding expression through a single mythological figure. And that figure works because it's memorable, terrifying, and useful. It encodes survival knowledge. It provides explanatory power. It creates community cohesion. Whether the Nuckelavee exists in any literal sense becomes almost irrelevant. The legend exists. The legend functions. The legend survives. And on foggy Orkney nights, when the wind howls and the waves crash, and something moves in the darkness, the Nuckelavee feels real enough. That's probably all that ever mattered. So what happens to legends like this in our modern world? We've discussed the tourist appropriation, the media adaptations, the environmental reinterpretation. But there's something else happening too. A quiet revival of interest in folklore as folklore, not as entertainment. Young people, especially those interested in ecology, sustainability, and indigenous knowledge systems, are looking back at traditional beliefs with new respect. Not as literal truth, necessarily, but as encoded wisdom. The Nuckelavee, in this context, becomes interesting again, not as a monster, but as a warning system. Our ancestors noticed patterns. They encoded those patterns in memorable stories. Those stories saved lives. Modern environmental science tells us things pre-modern people couldn't have known literally. But they knew something was happening. They observed, remembered, and passed on warnings. The Nuckelavee is one such warning. It says, the ocean is dangerous. Pollution causes cascading failures. Disease patterns exist. Communities must maintain protections. Some forces can't be fought, only evaded. All of this remains true, even if the skinless horse demon doesn't literally exist. So maybe the Nuckelavee's modern survival isn't about belief in the supernatural. Maybe it's about recognizing that our ancestors weren't stupid. They were watching, learning, encoding knowledge in the forms available to them. We have different forms now. Scientific papers, data visualization, predictive models. But the underlying observations often align surprisingly well with the folklore. The Nuckelavee told Orcadians, dangerous season is coming. Maintain freshwater supplies. Stay away from the shore during storms. Watch for signs of disease. Protect your community. Modern environmental science tells us extreme weather is increasing. Maintain clean water sources. Avoid coastal areas during storm surge. Monitor for disease outbreaks. Support community resilience. Different language. Same wisdom. The Nuckelavee endures not because people believe in monsters, but because the patterns it represented remain relevant. The ocean is still dangerous. Pollution still causes cascading failures. Disease still follows environmental disruption. The monster's form might be metaphorical, but the danger was always real. Let's talk about what makes the Nuckelavee uniquely terrifying compared to other folklore monsters. Most monsters have limits, vulnerabilities, rules. Vampires fear crosses in sunlight. Werewolves fear silver. Ghosts can be exorcised. Even demons can be banished. The Nuckelavee's protections, rowan, running water, iron, don't destroy it. They only block it temporarily. The creature itself is indestructible. It can't be killed, can't be imprisoned permanently, can't be negotiated with, can't be appeased. It's pure malevolence with no redemption arc, no tragic backstory, no hidden vulnerability. This is unusual in folklore. Most monsters, when you dig into their stories, have some element of tragedy or some way to resolve the threat. The ghost is a murdered person seeking justice. The vampire was once human. The demon can be sent back to hell. The Nuckelavee was never human, has no motivations beyond destruction, can't be reasoned with or understood. It exists only to cause suffering and can't be permanently stopped. Only one entity can contain it, the sea mither, and even she can only bind it seasonally. She can't destroy it either. This creates a cosmology where evil is fundamental and ineradicable. The best you can do is cycle between periods of safety and periods of danger. There's no final victory, no permanent peace, just endless repetition. That's a bleak worldview, but it might be a realistic one, not in supernatural terms, but in understanding that some problems don't have permanent solutions. Climate change won't be solved once. Environmental degradation requires constant vigilance. Disease will always threaten. Storms will always come. The Nuckelavee's ineradicability reflects the ineradicability of natural threats. You can't kill winter. You can't destroy storms. You can only prepare, protect, and survive each cycle. This is why the sea myther is so important. She doesn't represent victory over evil. She represents the cyclical containment of evil. Spring doesn't defeat winter forever. It just pushes it back for a while. That's not the story structure we usually want. We want permanent solutions. Heroes who slay dragons and live happily ever after. The Nuckelavee legend denies that comfort. It says, the dragon can't be slain. The best you can do is keep it locked up most of the year and hide when it breaks free. Not satisfying, but possibly honest. Good luck explaining that to children. The monster can't be defeated, sweetie. Just avoid it. Great lesson. But here's the thing. Maybe that is a valuable lesson for children. Modern children's media almost always features triumph over adversity. The hero defeats the villain. The problem is solved. The world is saved. This creates expectations. Problems are solvable. Evil can be defeated. Effort guarantees success. But real life doesn't always work that way. Some problems persist despite our best efforts. Some threats return cyclically. Some forces are too large to overcome individually. The Nuckelavee legend teaches different lessons. Community protection matters. Traditional knowledge saves lives. Some threats require avoidance, not confrontation. Survival is its own form of victory. These lessons might be more useful than the hero's journey narrative, especially for children growing up in an era of climate change, pandemic threats, and systemic challenges that can't be defeated through individual action. The Nuckelavee teaches humility. It teaches respect for forces larger than yourself. It teaches that knowing when not to fight is wisdom, not cowardice. It also teaches that survival strategies passed down through generations exist for reasons. The old people who insist on maintaining fresh water supplies, who refuse to travel at night in winter, who hang rowan above doorways. They're not being superstitious. They're remembering what works. In a world that often dismisses traditional knowledge as primitive, the Nuckelavee legend suggests otherwise. Those traditions encode survival experience. Ignore them at your own risk. This is valuable for children to understand. Not every problem has an action hero solution. Sometimes the smart move is to listen to your elders, follow the protective rituals, and survive to fight another day. The Nuckelavee doesn't make a great children's story in the traditional sense. It's not comforting. It doesn't have a happy ending, but it has a true ending. And maybe that's more valuable. As we near the end, let's consider one final question. Does the Nuckelavee still exist? Not literally, or at least, probably not literally, but symbolically? Functionally? If the Nuckelavee represents environmental degradation, then yes, it's more active than ever. Ocean pollution, climate change, ecosystem collapse. These are the Nuckelavee's modern manifestations. If the Nuckelavee represents disease spread, then yes, it's still active. COVID-19 proved that pandemics remain possible. Antibiotic resistance is growing. New diseases emerge constantly. If the Nuckelavee represents the ocean's power and humanity's vulnerability to it, then yes, it's eternally present. Every hurricane, every tsunami, every ship lost at sea is the Nuckelavee in different form. The skinless horse demon probably doesn't patrol Orkney shores anymore, but the forces it represented never left. They just wear different faces now. The protections have changed too. We don't hang rowan branches or sprinkle fresh water. We build seawalls, develop vaccines, monitor environmental data, create emergency response systems. Different methods, same goal. Keep the community safe. Survive the dangerous seasons. Pass on the knowledge to the next generation. The sea myther's role has changed as well. She's not a goddess anymore, at least not in most people's understanding. But the concept of natural cycles containing natural threats remains valid. Winter gives way to spring. Storms pass. Ecosystems recover. The eternal battle between Seamither and Nuckelavee continues. We just call it different things now. Climate science versus environmental destruction. Public health versus disease spread. Human resilience versus natural disaster. The Nuckelavee won't die because the threats it represents won't die. As long as the ocean exists, as long as storms come, as long as disease spreads, the Nuckelavee will exist in some form. Maybe that's the legend's real genius. It's adaptable. It can absorb new meanings without losing old ones. It can be disease demon, pollution spirit, storm god, environmental metaphor, trauma symbol, all simultaneously. The form changes. The threat remains. And the lesson remains too. Respect the forces greater than yourself. Maintain your protections, support your community, and survive. That was true in medieval Orkney. It's true in modern Orkney. It'll be true in future Orkney. The Nuckelavee is eternal, because the ocean is eternal, because storms are eternal, because human vulnerability is eternal. We build better defenses now. We understand more about disease and weather. We have technology our ancestors couldn't imagine. But we're still just humans living on an island in the North Sea, hoping the next storm doesn't kill us, hoping the crops don't fail, hoping the fish return, hoping our protections hold. The Nuckelavee is still out there, just waiting, breathing wet, labored breaths, watching with that single enormous eye, contained for now, but never gone. That's the lesson. That's the warning. That's the wisdom of the legend. Some forces can't be defeated, only endured. Welcome to Orkney. Keep your fresh water close. Don't travel at night in winter. And if you smell rot and brine on the wind, run. The Nuckelavee also appears in comparative mythology discussions, where scholars examine how different cultures develop similar monsters in response to similar environmental pressures. Japanese folklore has the kappa, a water demon that drowns people and has a depression in its skull that must stay water-filled. Different form from the Nuckelavee, but similar function. Keep people away from dangerous water. Slavic folklore has the Vodyanoi, a male water spirit that drowns people, particularly at night or during storms. Again, different aesthetics, same warning system. Greek mythology has countless sea monsters. Charybdis, Scylla, various Cetus creatures, all representing oceanic dangers. What makes the Nuckelavee distinctive is its specificity. It's not just a water monster. It's a pollution demon that causes blight, disease, and environmental collapse. It's seasonal. It can't cross fresh water. It has specific vulnerabilities and specific threat patterns. This level of detail suggests the legend emerged from specific environmental observations, not just general fear of water. The Nuckelavee encodes information about Orkney's particular challenges. The types of storms, the disease patterns, the agricultural vulnerabilities unique to those islands. A Greek sea monster wouldn't work in Orkney. The environmental conditions are different. The threats are different. The Nuckelavee is specifically adapted to its environment, just like the human communities that created it. This is what makes folklore valuable for anthropologists and historians. It's not just entertainment. It's encoded environmental knowledge, specific to place and time. When we lose folklore, we lose that specificity. We lose the details that made it functional. We're left with generic scary monster instead of specific threat with specific protections. The Nuckelavee is valuable not just as a story, but as a record of what medieval Orcadians observed, feared, and learned to survive. Perfect. Your monster is actually an environmental database. How romantic. Let's also consider the Nuckelavee's relationship to liminality, the concept of in-between spaces that feature prominently in folklore. The Nuckelavee inhabits liminal zones, land and sea, season and season, living and dead. It's described as appearing corpse-like, despite being animate. Liminal spaces are dangerous in folklore because they're transitional. They don't have clear rules. Normal protections might not apply. Boundaries are uncertain. The shoreline is the ultimate liminal space, neither fully land nor fully water. Tides shift the boundary twice daily. Storms blur the distinction entirely. This is where the Nuckelavee appears most often. Dawn and dusk, liminal times, neither day nor night, are also associated with increased Nuckelavee activity. The monster appears in fog, which creates liminal visibility where you can't quite see what's approaching. The seasonal transitions: autumn equinox when the Nuckelavee breaks free, spring equinox when the sea myther imprisons it, mark liminal moments between seasons. Even the Nuckelavee's body is liminal. It fuses horse and human, combines two torsos, has one eye, neither blind nor fully sighted, has no skin, neither fully living nor fully dead. This emphasis on liminality reflects psychological reality. Transitions are dangerous because patterns are disrupted. You can't rely on established knowledge. New approaches are required, but the right approach is uncertain. Medieval communities faced genuine dangers during seasonal transitions. Weather is unpredictable. Resources might not have lasted through winter. Spring agricultural work must begin at exactly the right time. Too early and crops die. Too late and growing season is insufficient. The Nuckelavee appearing during these liminal moments reflects the anxiety of transition. The monster embodies the uncertainty, the danger of getting the transition wrong. And the protections, rowan, iron, fresh water, provide psychological anchors during uncertain times. When everything else is shifting, these protections remain constant. There's something you can control when so much is uncontrollable. The Nuckelavee legend doesn't just warn about danger. It provides a framework for navigating transitional anxiety. Lovely. Your coping mechanism for uncertainty involves being terrorized by a horse demon. That's healthy. There's also something interesting about how the Nuckelavee legend handles blame and responsibility. Many folklore monsters punish specific transgressions. Vampires target the sinful. Ghosts haunt those who wronged them. Demons claim those who made deals. The Nuckelavee doesn't work that way. It doesn't punish immorality. It just destroys. You don't have to do anything wrong to attract it. You just have to be there. This removes moral judgment from suffering. When crops fail or disease strikes, it's not because the community sinned. It's because the Nuckelavee is loose. It's environmental catastrophe, not divine punishment. This distinction matters psychologically. If disaster is punishment for sin, then survivors might be racked with guilt. Communities might turn on scapegoats, and suffering becomes morally loaded. But if disaster is just the Nuckelavee, a force of nature that attacks indiscriminately, then survivors aren't guilty. They're just lucky or skilled at following the protections. This creates a healthier response to catastrophe. Instead of asking, "What did we do wrong?" communities ask, "How do we survive?" The focus shifts from blame to practical action. The sea myther's seasonal imprisonment of the Nuckelavee also removes agency from human action. People don't defeat the Nuckelavee through virtue or effort. The sea myther fights that battle. Humans just survive the seasons when she's losing and thrive in the seasons when she's winning. This might seem disempowering, but it's actually psychologically protective. It says, you're not responsible for forces vastly larger than yourself. You're responsible for following the protections, supporting your community, and surviving. That's enough. That's victory. Modern psychology calls this understanding the locus of control, distinguishing between what you can control and what you can't. Trying to control the uncontrollable creates anxiety and suffering. Focusing on what you can actually influence creates agency and resilience. The Nuckelavee legend has this built in. You can't control the monster. You can control your protective practices. Focus there. That's surprisingly healthy for medieval folklore. Good luck explaining that to therapists. My cultural trauma response involves seasonal demon battles. Great. Let's examine how the Nuckelavee legend might have functioned for children specifically. Because folklore often serves educational purposes. Children growing up in medieval Orkney needed to learn survival skills quickly. The margin for error was small. Mistakes could be fatal, either immediately or through cumulative effects. Wandering too close to cliff edges, drinking contaminated water, not recognizing storm signs. The Nuckelavee provides a memorable framework for teaching these lessons. Don't go near the shore at night in winter becomes the Nuckelavee hunts the shore in winter. Always know where fresh water is becomes the Nuckelavee can't cross running water. Pay attention to weather signs becomes the Nuckelavee appears with fog and storms. Maintain good relationships with neighbors becomes community protections work better than individual ones. The monster makes abstract rules concrete and memorable. A child might forget, don't drink stagnant water, but they'll remember, the Nuckelavee poisons water. Fear is an effective teaching tool for immediate dangers, especially for young children who don't yet have developed risk assessment. The Nuckelavee creates appropriate wariness around genuine dangers. The ocean, winter weather, disease, isolation. As children mature, they can begin to understand the practical reasons behind the supernatural warnings. But the early fear conditioning has already created safe behavioral patterns. This isn't unique to Orkney. Cultures worldwide use monsters to teach children survival skills. But the Nuckelavee is particularly well designed for this purpose. It's memorable, horrifically so. It covers multiple dangers: water, weather, disease, isolation, and it's seasonal, teaching temporal awareness. The legend also teaches children to listen to elders. Grandparents who survived Nuckelavee seasons have valuable knowledge. Dismissing their warnings as superstition could be fatal. This creates respect for traditional knowledge and intergenerational knowledge transfer, both crucial for pre-literate societies where survival information must be passed orally. So the Nuckelavee isn't just a scary story. It's a comprehensive educational program disguised as folklore. That's nice. Your school curriculum involves terrorizing children with corpse horses. Very wholesome. Now let's consider what happened to Nuckelavee belief during periods of social change in Orkney. The 19th century brought massive shifts. Industrialization, emigration, religious reform, education changes, economic transformation. Each of these affected how people related to the legend. Industrialization meant new economic opportunities beyond traditional fishing and farming. Younger generations moved to cities or worked in emerging industries. This broke the direct connection to environmental survival that made the Nuckelavee legend immediately relevant. When your livelihood depends on daily interaction with the ocean and land, the Nuckelavee makes sense. When you work in a factory or office, the immediate relevance diminishes. The monster becomes your grandparents' problem, not yours. Emigration drained Orkney of population, particularly young people. This disrupted the intergenerational knowledge transfer that kept folklore alive. Grandparents told stories, but their grandchildren moved away before fully internalizing the lessons. Religious reform, particularly the rise of evangelical Christianity in Scotland, actively opposed pagan beliefs like the Nuckelavee. Ministers preached against superstition, taught that such beliefs were sinful or foolish. Some communities responded by hiding their folk beliefs or practicing them privately. This created a split between public belief, Christian, rational, modern, and private practice, folk traditions, protective rituals, supernatural awareness. The Nuckelavee became something you didn't talk about in polite company, but might still reference privately. Education changes introduced children to scientific worldviews that contradicted supernatural explanations. Schools taught that disease came from germs, not demons. That weather was atmospheric conditions, not supernatural battles. This created generational friction. Children learned one reality in school, another at home. Often they adopted the school's version as truth and dismissed home traditions as ignorance. Economic transformation meant Orkney became increasingly connected to broader Scottish and British markets. Local self-sufficiency decreased. When crops failed, grain could be imported. When fish were scarce, other food sources were available. This reduced the immediate existential stakes that made the Nuckelavee legend functionally necessary. Disaster became inconvenience rather than community-ending catastrophe. All these changes eroded the Nuckelavee's immediate relevance. The legend persisted, but became increasingly decorative rather than functional. Something to tell tourists, not something to organize your life around. By the mid-20th century, most Orcadians knew of the Nuckelavee, but didn't believe in it, didn't follow the protections, and related to it primarily as cultural heritage rather than lived belief. The monster didn't adapt fast enough to remain relevant, or perhaps couldn't adapt. Its function was too tied to specific pre-modern conditions. Awesome, right? Your demon couldn't compete with the Industrial Revolution. Modernity wins. But there's an interesting reversal happening in the 21st century. As environmental awareness increases, folklore monsters like the Nuckelavee are being rediscovered and reinterpreted, not as literal beings, but as metaphors for environmental threats that were ignored or misunderstood. Climate change creates conditions remarkably similar to what the Nuckelavee represented. Environmental degradation, seasonal disruption, disease pattern changes, oceanic threats, agricultural challenges. Young environmentalists looking for ways to communicate these threats sometimes reference folklore. The Nuckelavee becomes shorthand for our ancestors knew the environment could fight back. This isn't belief in the traditional sense. Modern environmental activists don't think a skinless horse demon is causing climate change. But they recognize that the pattern the Nuckelavee represented, environmental collapse following human disruption, remains relevant. The legend also offers something modern environmental discourse sometimes lacks: emotional resonance. Scientific data about parts per million CO2 is accurate but abstract. The Nuckelavee is loose, carries immediate emotional weight. Some contemporary artists and writers in Orkney are deliberately reviving Nuckelavee imagery for environmental advocacy. Sculptures, paintings, performances that invoke the monster as warning about what happens when environmental protections fail. This is folklore evolution in real time. The Nuckelavee is being rebuilt for a new era, addressing new threats, but carrying forward the core message: the environment can destroy you if you don't maintain proper respect and protection. Whether this new interpretation will achieve the cultural power of the original remains to be seen. But it suggests the legend isn't dead, just transforming. The Nuckelavee endures because the pattern endures. The specifics change. The warning remains. How lovely. Your ancient folklore is now climate activism. Very modern. Let's also consider the role of storytellers in maintaining and evolving the Nuckelavee legend. In oral cultures, storytellers aren't just entertainers. They're knowledge keepers, historians, and educators. The way they tell stories shapes how communities understand their world. A skilled storyteller could modulate the Nuckelavee tale based on audience and context. For children, emphasizing the protections and how they keep people safe. For adults, adding nuance about seasonal patterns and community preparedness. For elders, perhaps discussing how the story has changed over generations. The storyteller also adapts the tale to current conditions. If disease had recently struck, the Nuckelavee story might emphasize its plague-bringing aspects. If storms had been particularly severe, those elements would be highlighted. This flexibility kept the legend relevant. It wasn't a fixed text that became outdated. It was a living narrative that responded to immediate community needs. Different storytellers had different styles, different emphases, different details. This created variation within the tradition. One village's Nuckelavee might differ slightly from another's. Different size, different behaviors, different vulnerability patterns. This variation actually strengthened the legend. It prevented it from becoming too specific to be wrong. If someone encountered something that didn't quite match their version of the Nuckelavee, they could incorporate those new details, creating a hybrid description. The legend evolved like a living organism, adapting to new information, incorporating new experiences, remaining relevant across changing conditions. When folklore collection began in the 19th century, collectors like Denison tried to capture the authentic version. But there was no single authentic version. There were hundreds of versions, each slightly different, each adapted to specific times and communities. The written collections froze the legend at a particular moment. This preserved it, but also killed its evolutionary potential. The Nuckelavee became a fixed text instead of a fluid tradition. This is what happened to most folklore. Writing preserved it, but also embalmed it. The living tradition died when it was captured in books. Modern attempts to revive the Nuckelavee often rely on these frozen texts, creating a strange relationship where the legend is simultaneously dead, no longer evolving, and undead, still circulating, but not quite alive. Some contemporary Orcadian storytellers are trying to restart the evolutionary process, taking the traditional core but adapting it to modern contexts, allowing new variations to emerge, treating it as a living tradition again, rather than historical artifact. Whether this works remains to be seen. But it represents an understanding that folklore's power comes from its adaptability, not its fixity. The Nuckelavee that terrified medieval Orcadians might not be the Nuckelavee that serves modern communities. And that's okay. Evolution is survival. Good luck with that. Your tradition dies when documented. Very encouraging. Finally, let's talk about what the Nuckelavee reveals about human psychology and our relationship with fear. The legend is, fundamentally, terrifying. Grotesque appearance, unstoppable nature, association with every form of disaster, no possibility of permanent victory. But communities lived with this terror for centuries. They didn't collapse under the psychological weight. They functioned, thrived even, with the Nuckelavee as part of their cosmology. This suggests humans can bear enormous psychological burden if it's structured properly. The Nuckelavee legend structured fear in specific ways. 1. Made it seasonal. Terror year-round is unsustainable. Knowing the dangerous periods, autumn-winter, and safe periods, spring-summer, made the fear manageable. 2. Provided protections. Rowan, iron, fresh water. These gave people agency. You couldn't defeat the monster, but you could protect yourself. 3. Created community cohesion. Shared fear bonds communities. Everyone understood the threat. Everyone followed the protections. Everyone supported each other. 4. Explained suffering. When disaster struck, it wasn't random or meaningless. It was the Nuckelavee. Comprehensible, if horrible. 5. Removed personal blame. Disaster wasn't punishment for sin. It was environmental catastrophe. Survivors weren't guilty. These elements transformed existential dread into manageable fear. The Nuckelavee was terrible, but the legend also provided the framework for living with that terror. Modern psychology recognizes that uncertainty and unpredictability create more anxiety than known threats, even horrible ones. The Nuckelavee removed uncertainty. The threat was known, patterned, understandable. This might be the legend's most valuable aspect, not the monster itself, but the psychological framework it provided for processing environmental danger. We've lost that framework in modern life. We know intellectually that climate change threatens everything, but we lack the psychological structures for processing that threat. It's too large, too uncertain, too slow-moving. The Nuckelavee provided clear patterns: dangerous season, safe season, protective practices, community response. Climate change offers nothing that clear. Maybe that's why some people want to revive folklore. Not because they believe in monsters, but because they need the psychological framework monsters provided. A known monster is easier to handle than shapeless dread. Perfect. Your coping mechanism involves choosing to believe in demons. That's definitely healthy. And that's the story of the Nuckelavee, the most horrifying creature in Scottish folklore. the skinless demon of the Orkney Islands, the pollution spirit that embodied every fear and every threat that medieval communities faced. It's a legend that emerged from genuine survival challenges, encoded in the most memorable and terrifying form possible. A legend that shaped behavior, protected communities, and survived for centuries. It persists today, not because people believe in literal horse demons, but because the patterns it represented remain relevant. The ocean is dangerous. Pollution causes cascading failures. Disease follows environmental disruption. Communities need protection. Some threats require avoidance rather than confrontation. These truths remain constant even as our understanding of them evolves. The Nuckelavee taught medieval Orcadians how to survive. It can still teach modern people how to think about environmental threats, disease patterns, and community resilience. Not as entertainment, not as curiosity, but as encoded wisdom from people who watched, learned, and survived. The skinless horse demon might be gone, but the lessons remain. And on foggy nights in Orkney, when the wind howls and the waves crash and something moves in the darkness, maybe, just maybe, those lessons still save lives. Thank you for listening to this journey into one of folklore's darkest legends. If you made it this far, you've earned your rest. Remember, subscribe if you enjoyed this. Drop a comment about your own experiences with Scottish folklore or your thoughts on environmental legends, and I'll see you in the next story. Stay safe out there. Keep your fresh water close. Respect the ocean. And if you ever visit Orkney, don't go near the shore in winter. Sleep well, everyone. The Sea Myther is watching. For now, you're safe. For now.